weird things have been going on this morning, but I think we've got a pretty dynamite show lined up for you. We're in for some treats. I think I've taken some suggestions. I had a different plan, but then throwing some pieces together that I hope you just enjoy as much as I do. That's the idea here. We're just having fun. Happy Easter, everybody. Before we kick it off, I want to say hi to Sheila, hi to Brent, hi to Lightning Rod, hello to my buddy Kirk. Who else is here today? I think I saw Clint earlier. Christina Rose, how are you? James Vahey, what up? Yeah, let's just get it going. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining, and we are slipping into this. So let's...
Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nick Nanos.
Nick, we often talk about the conservative lead over the Liberals. I thought for this episode we might dig in a little bit into the NDP support. What's the latest ballot tracking?
Latest Nanos Weekly ballot tracking, drum roll. Conservatives 39, Liberals 25, NDP 20, Bloc at 8, Green Party at 5, People's Party at 1.5. So, was a 20-point advantage for the Conservatives, now about a 15-point advantage or thereabouts. So, that's still pretty good. But I think if you're a Conservative, you want to make sure that it doesn't keep going down because, obviously a 20-point advantage would have been a massive victory if the election had occurred. But right now we see the margin, at least between the Conservatives and the Liberals, going down, but still pretty significant.
And the NDP's, you said at 20, so, not too far behind the Liberals. We had a recent by-election in Ontario, and you noticed something interesting about the NDP support there. Yeah,
here's one thing to watch out for is these by-elections. What do we learn from the by-elections? Well, what we've seen in the most recent by-election and a couple of the other ones is that at the last minute, NDP support goes down and it goes into the Liberal column. It doesn't necessarily help the Liberals win the riding. It didn't help them in Durham. But NDP support being lower than the last federal election and that being the dynamic. So think of it this way, Michael. If the NDP support, say there's 5 points in the NDP or Orange column that are actually disaffected Liberals. These are the people that I think Justin Trudeau and the Liberals will hope that they will hold their nose and vote Liberal when it comes to an actual election. So one of the things we have to remember about the national polling numbers is that there's no repercussion because there's no federal election right now. I think the Liberal and NDP numbers could be different if the election was the next day or this week. And so just think of it this way. We said Conservatives with a 15-point advantage. If what's happening in these by-election holds up, perhaps the true advantage that the Conservatives have is not 15 points. Maybe it's 10 right now. So puts the Liberals a little closer to being competitive with the federal Conservatives.
Now, Nick, under the leadership of Justin Trudeau, we've seen the Liberals occupy a lot of the political space, usually taken up by the NDP. I think cannabis legalization is a famous or obvious example of that. So the NDP has to really struggle to distinguish themselves to voters. Recently, we saw an NDP motion calling on Canada to recognize the state of Palestine. It was approved with sort of a watered down version, I suppose you could say, and the Liberals did come on board after these amendments. Is this something we'll increasingly see from the NDP?
Absolutely, because the thing is that if they don't differentiate themselves from the Liberals, they will get absolutely crushed because people will just say, for a few years you propped up the Liberals and kept Justin Trudeau in power, and people won't see a significant difference. And I think that's why the purpose of this vote on recognizing the Palestinian state is probably good politics, at least for the New Democrats, because it creates a wedge within the Liberals, because the Liberals are divided on this issue, and it allows the New Democrats to differentiate themselves. So think of the NDP actually now starting to get ready for an election. The Liberals are getting ready for the election. The Conservatives are running very hard, and now the New Democrats, it looks like they're starting to kind of create the differentiation between them and the Liberals. And this particular vote on the state of Palestine is an example of that. And I think we should expect a couple more things so that Jagmeet Singh can say, yes, we propped up the Liberals. We managed to deliver on a couple things like pharmacare and the dental plan, and we're different. And I think that's probably what he's doing right now.
Anticipating that on the Liberal side, I wonder what they have planned for the upcoming federal budget.
Well, the thing is first of all, the budget is a confidence motion, so that has to get passed. The big question is this going to be an election goodie budget or or something that's more restraint oriented? And the challenge that they have is if this becomes an election big spending budget, it could actually fuel inflation and probably impact the Bank of Canada's ability to control interest rates if the Liberals look to spend more. So the recent polling that we did for Bloomberg News suggests that Canadians are more likely to want spending restraint, either to reduce taxes or to reduce the size of the deficit, and that there isn't as much appetite for spending as there is for government cutting spending.
You guys find this a little
Nick,
bit of a
obviously cost of living is a big
find it's a
issue
little
for
bit of a
Canadians, and on April 1st we're
Not a
seeing
lot of
a
people do
carbon
what he
tax
does, though.
increase.
It is interesting.
Prime Minister Justin
I'd like to
Trudeau
hear.
has responded to this in sort of an interesting way. Listen to this.
Now, your question, Rick, is sort of, well, that all makes sense. Why are so many people still against it? Well, that's a question we all have to ask. But my job is not to be popular. My job, although it helps, my job is to do the right things for Canada now and do the right things for Canadians a generation from now.
Well, there you go, Nick. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess he's admitted that he's not popular, right? I guess if you say my job's not to be popular, it's basically kind of saying that you are popular. I think the other question I'd like to say is, who puts a tax increase on April 1st? Like, that sounds like a cruel April Fool's joke. Yeah, let's just, talk about something that will be a meme. Liberals increase carbon taxes on April Fool's Day, except, people are not fools.
Hey, tinfoil hat.
What's happening right now is that, it's pretty clear. The Liberals know they're trailing the Conservatives significantly. Justin Trudeau is trailing Pierre Poilievre as the preferred Prime Minister. And why this is so important, is that it's not just a matter of the Liberals not being popular. People are blaming the government for the rising cost of living. In a survey that we recently did, we kind of identified what were the contributors, or who do you think is creating this problem. And about 31% of Canadians think that government spending, federal government spending, or increased federal government spending has been one of the main contributors to the rising cost of living. That's up 5 points since 2022. The Bank of Canada is at 9. So you could roll those two things together because they are both part of the federal government. So 4 out of every 10 Canadians either point their finger at the government or point their finger at the Bank of Canada as a contributor to the rising cost of living. Businesses come in at 26. And there are twice as many people are now blaming businesses and corporate greed compared to the past. So this isn't just about being unpopular. Part of that unpopularity that exists right now for the Liberals and Justin Trudeau, and things could change, but the current popularity relates to the fact that it looks like there's a significant portion of people that are directly blaming big government spending and the Bank of Canada for the current situation when it comes to the rising cost of living. So there's where you're at.
Nick, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, a lesson from the late Brian Mulroney.
They were taking a break. I guess they have announcements on their channel.
Nick, the late Prime Minister Brian Mulroney will have a state funeral. Canadians are paying their respects this month. I thought it might be interesting to look back at his surprise political victories and the lessons that they may offer to other political leaders of our time.
And, like all politicians, he went through a turbulent time and turbulent times because, whenever you're prime minister, there's somebody doing something wrong or something going wrong all the time. And, we've been talking about, can the Liberals, who are behind right now by 15 points, can they turn it around under Justin Trudeau? And and hold on to power. And what's interesting is that if we go into why don't we call it the trend line time machine, or we've got like a reverse crank that goes crank. Anyways,
we're still waiting for the sound effect on that one later,
Yeah,
in a later
exactly.
episode.
Yeah. So if we look at the time machine, if we go back to 1988, Brian Mulroney was seeking re-election after his 1984 blockbuster victory. He was seeking re-election. It was the free trade election in 1988. He was actually trailing John Turner and the Liberals by about 6 points.
I was pretty young,
And
but
he turned it around. Brian Mulroney turned it around in the close of the campaign and won by 11 points. That is a 17-point gain that happened. And, so, when we look at can numbers change? Absolutely. And the example of Brian Mulroney, who took what looked like could have been a defeat in 1988, and he turned it into a pretty impressive victory. We've saw that in terms of the recent election in Nova Scotia, where Premier Houston was behind and he had a 13-point gain. And, we saw the same thing, if you remember, going into the archives with both Kathleen Wynne in Ontario and Dalton McGuinty, where it looked like they were written off and they won. So, maybe the one thing that we can learn from Brian Mulroney is that elections matter, and that a good campaign can make a significant difference, especially if your opponents are flat-footed or make a massive blunder.
I think, yeah, for some of those, there were some self-owns, I suppose you'd say, with the opposition. I'm thinking in terms of that Ontario election against McGuinty, where the Conservative candidate made a promise about chain gangs, which I think was surprising.
I think one of the big controversial policies had to do with changing how schools are funded. And at schools. And then for Tim Hudak, there was an issue related to his platform with some numbers that didn't reconcile very well, and caused people who, in both of those particular elections, I think it would be fair to say that people thought that the Progressive Conservatives and the Progressive Conservatives of Ontario were going to win. And I think people started the election saying, I'm never going to vote Liberal. I'm never going to vote for McGuinty or Kathleen Wynne. I'm not doing that. And they said that to the very end. And then it was like, I can't believe that I'm voting for insert Kathleen Wynne, insert Dalton McGuinty. And here's another little important factoid. The Prime Minister's top advisor, his chief of staff, Katie Telford, was part and around in those situations in Ontario where the Liberals were counted down and out. People had written them off, and they ended up winning. So I don't think there are going to be any nervous folks, at least in the Prime Minister's office, because there'll be people there that have said, yeah, we've seen this before. Stay calm. It's possible for things to change. But we got to say, these are exceptions. These are exceptional campaigns. So the big question is will the next federal campaign be exceptional in terms of someone who's trailing significantly, turns it around, and ends up winning the election? We don't know that yet.
Nick, always fascinating. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
All right, guys. So we're right back, and now that was a suggestion that a good friend that I trust recommended, like that people would be interested in seeing that. And I've got a couple of other pieces I've got many other pieces to show. This next one is Poilievre, but he's on like City TV, one of those chum stations, and they are not on the side of the Conservatives. They're on Trudeau's payroll. So I think it will be interesting just to see the mood of the interview. Like, let's take a peek now. Again, I'm excited today to have the first person that I'm aware of that is still in their 20s in the room. That's awesome. Young people don't watch politics too much. I'm not talking about you, Devin. I'm talking about the other 20-year-olds. I think it's important. Anyways, I'm just excited to have a little bit of youth in the room. I'm always excited to have everyone, but somebody under 30, man, that's rare. So let's jump into this. This is Poilievre, sort of like in enemy territory. So we'll take a peek at that.
Well, after a busy week in Ottawa with debates about the Middle East and non-confidence motions, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is joining us live in studio to talk more about that and everything else that's happening in Ottawa. And we'll have a bit of a GTA focus as well. Mr. Poilievre, welcome to CP24 Breakfast this morning.
Good to be with you.
So let's talk about, the last couple of days in Ottawa, the confidence motion you were trying to get passed over the carbon tax. We know you want to spike the tax, spike the hike and axe the tax. We know that's your plan here, and that didn't quite work in Ottawa in the last couple of days. But what would a Conservative environmental plan look like? We know what you don't want in terms of the carbon tax, but what do you want to see to deal with climate change?
Well, we do want to axe the tax because it's not working. It's after 8 years of Trudeau, everything costs more. Work doesn't pay. Housing costs have doubled, and now he wants to hammer us with an April Fool's Day, joke's on you, carbon tax hike of 23% as part of a plan to quadruple the tax, which is going to drive, it's going to kill jobs. It's going to force seniors to choose between eating and heating. And so we moved a non-confidence motion to force a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide. We think that lowering the cost of alternatives is better than raising the cost of traditional energy we still need. We did green projects like nuclear power, hydroelectricity, tidal wave power, carbon capture and storage, so that Canadians have an abundant supply of affordable, emissions-free electricity and power. So again, here's the choice. Do you want to raise the cost of traditional energy we still need, like gas and home heating, or do we want to lower the cost of low emitting alternatives? And I believe in the latter. That's common sense.
I can certainly see politically what you're trying to do, and it seems like polls are on your side in terms of the unpopularity of the carbon tax, or carbon rebate as it's been rebranded recently. And also there are 7 premiers from across the political spectrum in this country who are lined up against the Liberals' kind of like flagship proposal or policy as it is. I want to know, though, if you were the Prime Minister and you had 7 premiers across this country lining up against something you were pushing, what would you do? Would you listen? Would you reverse? Like, do you blame Justin Trudeau for sticking to it, as it were?
I do blame him for sticking to it because it's a terrible policy. It's driving up the cost of food, for example. When you tax the farmer who produces the food and the trucker who ships the food, the grocer who sells the food, you tax all who buy the food. And that's why 2 million people are lined up at food banks across the country. 32% of food banks or charities are turning away Canadians because they don't have the resources to feed them. Now we have a dumpster diving network. That's 8,000 Canadians who've joined a Facebook group learning how to jump into a garbage can to get a meal out. Yeah. These are things, police had to be called in because there was a near riot at a food bank in Montreal last week because food ran out, people were hungry. This would have been unimaginable before Justin Trudeau. But after 8 years of doubling housing costs, of driving up food prices, he's given Canadians a misery. He's not worth the cost. He's not worth the crime. He's not worth the corruption. We need a common sense Conservative government.
And if you were in government, would you listen if 7 premiers were opposed to your
If 7 premiers, well, 7 premiers aren't going to have to tell me to axe the tax. I will axe the tax with or without 7 premiers. My common sense plan is to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. And the next election will be about the carbon tax. It will be a gigantic referendum on whether you want a 61 cent a litre carbon tax or you want to axe the tax to bring home lower prices.
Okay, let's talk about Toronto here, because of course Toronto is, like it or not, and some people don't like it, but Toronto seems to be the economy that moves a lot of this country here. This city has been looking for a new deal from the federal government and seems to go cap in hand to Ottawa quite frequently. I'm sure a lot of people watching right now, people who potentially could be voters for you in the next election, may be wondering, what are your thoughts on the city of Toronto, whether it needs a new or specific special funding plan? You can think about, just a few weeks ago, we had refugees sleeping on the streets at a shelter around here, newcomers to this country, welcome to the country, but had nothing when they got here, and it sort of fell to the city of Toronto. What would you do for the city of Toronto, and do you think the city needs a special or new financial deal?
Well, after 8 years of Trudeau, Toronto's broke. After he promised so much, and Toronto elected nothing but Liberals, what did they get for it? Well, they've got people lined up. 1 in 10 Torontonians are at a food bank every month. Yeah. 1 in 10. We have refugees, federally invited refugees sleeping on the streets. Thank you very much, Justin Trudeau, for that. We have a doubling of housing costs. After 8 years of Trudeau, it now takes a quarter century, 25 years, for the average family to save up for a down payment in Toronto. You used to pay off an entire mortgage in 25 years before Justin Trudeau. So my common sense plan would do a number of things. One, we're going to fix the broken immigration system so that we bring in the numbers that we can absorb. Two, we're going to link the number of federal dollars that Toronto's gets and all cities get to the number of homes they allow to be built. The bureaucracy at the City Hall is blocking housing construction. I want to incentivize faster home building. I'll require Toronto and all big cities permit 15% more home building per year as a condition of federal funding. If they don't hit it, they'll lose their money. If they beat the target, they'll get a bonus. I'm going to require every federally funded transit station be surrounded by high-rise apartments so young people and seniors can live next to the bus or train. We're going to sell off 6,000 federal buildings, thousands of acres of federal land to build. And we want those to be in safe neighborhoods.
Right.
So we're going to end catch and release and bring in jail, not bail, jail, not bail. We're going to give out treatment and recovery, not free drugs. And we're also going to stop going after law-abiding hunters and sports shooters, instead go after real gun criminals by sealing the border to stop criminals from bringing drugs and guns in and taking our cars out.
Let's talk about housing, because a lot of that answer was sort of housing specific. And yesterday, Premier Doug Ford, your sort of federal or provincial cousin, as it were, kind of slammed the door shut on the idea of building fourplexes in and around the city of Toronto. The current federal housing minister, Sean Fraser, sort of poo-pooed it on Twitter, saying, he's missed an opportunity to build housing. You want to see more housing built. What do you think of that decision? Should fourplexes be allowed in the city of Toronto to sort of help bring more people to the city?
Well, there are more than fourplexes. I'm looking out the window right now.
I guess it's more for the neighborhoods in the sort of urban areas rather than downtown.
I think we need more. We need to build up and we need to build out. I'm not going to prescribe exactly how that's done. What I'm going to do is pay for results. So right now, the federal government is sending big fat checks to municipalities every single year, which they use to build up their bureaucracies and block home building. Toronto is one of the worst. City Hall is terrible here for housing. Horrible, like unbelievably bad. Almost as bad as Vancouver, which is the worst. So my policy is very simple. I'm going to say to Toronto City Hall, you want federal money, you're going to have to get out of the way and let builders build. And you have to permit 15% more homes per year, or you're losing federal money. If you beat the target, you'll get a bonus. Realtors are paid for the number of homes they sell, builders for the number they build. I want municipalities to be paid for the number of homes they permit. Pay for results, get results, and that's what I'll do.
Kind of a carrot instead of a stick there, it sounds like.
A bit of both.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of both. GTA-wide, you have a new Conservative MP in Jamil Jivani. He just won in Durham, a Conservative seat for the person, of course, you took over from Ehren O'Toole. In his acceptance speech a few weeks ago, he went right after his former boss, Doug Ford, the PC leader here. I wonder what your reaction to that was, and if you've either spoken to your candidate or your member of the party or Premier Ford about that, because it seemed to ruffle some feathers, the idea that he kind of went after his old boss.
No, I haven't. My focus has been on axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. In fact, we have a federal budget coming up here, and Justin Trudeau has doubled our national debt and printed $600 billion of cash. No wonder we have such terrible inflation and high interest rates. So our major focus, and Jamil's, will be on capping government spending, cutting waste to get rid of these deficits so we can bring down inflation and interest rates. So I'll focus on my common sense plan and ignore the political noise.
On the political side of things, how would you characterize your relationship with Premier Ford? We don't see the two of you together that much.
He's the Premier of Ontario. I'm the next Prime Minister of Canada, so I'll work with all premiers on my common sense plan to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. It doesn't matter who you are or what your party color is. If you share those priorities, axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime, let's bring it home. And
you also talked, one more quick question here, you talked about building homes around transit, buildings around transit, that kind of a thing here. Transit is, of course, a big issue in Toronto, and the TTC lost $124 million from fare evasion last year. What do you think about more federal funding for the TTC, a system or service that kind of always seems desperate for cash?
Now, we just can't keep paying for failure. This idea every time some level of government screws up that they should get more money from taxpayers is over when I'm Prime Minister. Municipal funding will be based on how a house is built. So if the City of Toronto or any other city wants more federal money, they will have a very simple formula to do it. Get out of the way and let builders build more homes. Because right now, we have the fewest homes per capita of any country in the G7, even though we spend by far the most share of our economy on home building, and we have by far the most land to build on. What's the problem? Bureaucratic gatekeepers blocking it. I'm paying cities to get out of the way and let builders build, because I'm not going to accept the idea that an entire generation have to give up on having kids, owning a home, building home equity, and living a good life. That is the Canadian dream we took for granted before Trudeau, and it's a dream that we will restore when I'm Prime Minister.
Pierre Poilievre, thanks for joining us on CP24 Breakfast this morning.
Thank you very much
Enjoy your time in Toronto. Good to see you. Thank you very much.
All right, gang.
What do you think of Mr. Trudeau?
What is next? What we have next is, I think everybody likes watching Jordan Peterson. He's engaging, and he's going to engage two other Canadians that we think are very engaging. So let's jump right into that. Again, we're trying to give Freaky Friday treats, right? Just stuff that people like seeing. We're going to try it. Here we go.
So I think he's an egomaniac. And I think everything he does comes back to his egomania. Even his political ideology. If you really think about this expansionistic role of the state, it never comes back to serving an individual objective other than to make him more powerful or his legacy more grand. So let me give you a few examples. So he slashed the amount you can put into a tax-free savings account. But then he simultaneously increased the amount you were forced to pay into the state savings plan. He killed multiple pipelines. Then he invested state money in a pipeline. He attacked parents' ability to take care of their own children by removing tax fairness for families with a stay-at-home parent. And then he brings in a government program to replace it. So what you're seeing there is, you say, well, this sounds like these are utterly inconsistent positions. And the answer, no, they're not. They're all very consistent. In all cases, what he does is takes away the ability of business or individuals or families to do things for themselves, and it requires they do things through him and through the state. And his ideology is always about creating a pretext in order to justify the state garnering more control over every aspect of your life, how you raise your kids, how your business functions, what you see and say on the intranet. He believes the state has to be everywhere always, but that's because, as King Louis would say, l'État c'est moi. The state is him.
Well, that's okay. So I got a couple of things to throw at that. The first is, I think it's a very dangerous thing to attack the man rather than the ideas. But you're making, as a rule of thumb, but you're making a case that in this case, that can't be done because there is a personality trait that is uniting diverse policy decisions that isn't ideational or ideological even. It is in fact personal. And so my sense of Trudeau, initially, I was very upset with his decision to run for prime minister because I thought, well, you don't know anything. And you're attractive and you can behave well in public and you have a charming facade, but you don't know anything in any real sense. And there's no indication that you do. You're not particularly well educated and you're not particularly accomplished. And this is actually a hard job. But worse than that, the only reason you even have the vaguest possibility of succeeding is because you have the same last name as your father. And then he ran. And I thought, well, how do you justify that to yourself? Because the gap of knowledge must have been painfully evident to him. And the fact that the Trudeau name, you could say, well, the Liberal Party came to me. That's his justification. They came to me and there wasn't another person that could win on the Liberal side and better a Trudeau Liberal, even if it's a consequence of family name, than any damn Conservative, let's say. But I still saw it as a manifestation of a really profound narcissism. I think a reasonable person would have said, I'm not prepared for this, certainly not yet. And I'm not the man that there needs to be in this position. And so I don't know what you think about those musings, but that's how I looked at Trudeau. And I certainly haven't seen anything in the preceding years that has disabused me of any of those notions.
I mean, I think there's some truth in that. His victory was definitely not a meritocratic one, and he was probably the least vetted prime ministerial candidate in our history. The media just glossed over so much of his life. to go straight to help him and protect him. It was almost like they built a protective cocoon around him, and you know, like he had dressed up in grotesque racist costumes so many times. He says by his own claim, he can't remember them all. I mean, the average politician had done that once. It would have been exposed, and that person would have been expelled from politics altogether. You know, but you know, he had run as a middle class champion, even that while he sheltered the millions he inherited from his grandfather in a tax preferred trust fund. All these things would have been front and center in the public sphere had it been anyone other than a Trudeau. But he was protected by the media, who still protect him because he really is their candidate. He represents the political class and the establishment in Canada, those who profit off a big, bloated bureaucracy and regulatory state in the old Upper Canada aristocracy. Know that he will always deliver for them, and he has. He's delivered mightily for them. That's why they're doing so well, and that's why they'll fight tooth and nail to keep him there.
Why do you think he was and still remains attractive to a substantial subset of Canadians? I mean, people seem to regard him as charming and caring, and I think he is charming in a kind of shallow sense, but it isn't obvious to me at all that he's caring, but he seems to play the part, and he plays it well enough so that, well, many people, and this is true of people all over the world, certainly buy the act. So why do you think that is, and how do you combat that?
Yeah, look, he is charming. I won't deny that, and he's a good-looking dude. But I don't think he's actually that popular. So people forget he got 32% of the vote in the last election. 68% of those who cast ballots voted against him. That's the lowest. He got the lowest share of vote of any prime minister in Canadian history. And before him, the record was set by him in the previous election. He got 33% of the vote. He never actually reached the height, the vote share that Harper got in 2011. So we sometimes think he's an extremely popular guy because of the adulation he gets from the mainstream media, but in fact he's not that popular with ordinary Canadians. What he succeeded at doing, to his credit, is engineering a very efficient distribution of votes, so that with 32% of the vote, I think he got something like 45 or 46% of the seats, and that is the nut we need to crack. He wins a lot of seats with few votes. We win few seats with lots of votes. In fact, the last two elections, Conservatives have beat him in the popular vote. We just haven't got them in the right places. So that's the change we need to make, and I believe we will make in the forthcoming election.
So you don't think that it is a preponderance of Canadians who have had the wool pulled over their eyes?
No, he's not. By any objective analysis of the data, he's not an especially popular prime minister. And in fact, he's probably more on the side of an unpopular prime minister.
Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like having a first aid kit, but not encrypted VPN.
Mr. Singh.
Well, he lacks a raison d'etre, right? Why does he exist? You've already got an NDP prime minister, a socialist prime minister in Justin Trudeau. So that means the Socialist Party has to try to figure out what to do with itself. So far, JAGMEET has said, well, they'll just support Trudeau in a coalition. And the problem is when you go back to the electorate, people are going to say, well, you're part of the same problem. Like I had a gentleman I was in Chambly in Quebec, lifelong NDP supporter, very upset with how life is. The guy was telling me he's had to reduce his diet to one meal a day because food is so expensive. And he was voting for the NDP until he saw the NDP formed a coalition with Trudeau, the guy who's caused all the misery. So it's going to be very hard for JAGMEET to go to the people and claim that he represents anything other than the Trudeaupian status quo. And I think that in the next election, people will be looking for a drastic departure from Trudeau. So they'll be looking for the anti-Trudeau.
And so what do you think of him on the personal front? I mean, one of the things that's really struck me about Singh, apart from his unconditional support for Trudeau in exactly the manner you described, is that he seems almost stunningly and singularly devoid of ideas. I haven't seen anything come out of the NDP federally that isn't just woke nonsense, that constitutes a genuine appeal, let's say, to the working class. And I also thought that and we can talk about this too, his response to the truckers' convoy was something remarkable to behold, because here you had the party, the putative party of the oppressed working class, if anything, even more dismissive of that protest than the Liberals, which is really saying something, because Trudeau, as you pointed out, called them misogynists and bigots and claimed completely falsely, with the collusion of the CBC, that the vast preponderance of the money that funded that protest had come first from the bloody Russians and then from the American Republicans, who were apparently, trying to stage a coup in a country that isn't even really on their radar for reasons that no one's been able to. I was in the States, for 3 months. I went to 50 cities in the last 3 months. And I talked during the Q&A period about, because people kept asking, what's going on with Canada? And I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but our government and our media have told Canadians that MAGA-type Republicans basically tried to stage a coup to destabilize our democracy. And they would ask, and this was Democrats and Republicans alike, they would ask, well, why would we do that? What possible motive, if we cared, which we don't, why in the world would we possibly want to destabilize Canada's democracy? And the answer to that is, well, I always felt, as a representative of Canada in that situation, I always felt like I was in some sense out of my mind, because I couldn't believe that I could present that complex of ideas as a reality, and that there wasn't just something wrong with the way I was looking at the whole situation. It's so utterly preposterous. So, well, back to Mr. Singh. He didn't support the truckers at all.
No, and the NDP has abandoned the working class. They've become another party of the elite institutional aristocracy. That they represent those with big salaries doing managerial work. Many of whom have been able to work from home with fully protected salaries and incomes for the last 2 years, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with I don't begrudge anyone for having had that good fortune, but it's certainly, if you are such a person, then you shouldn't be judging those who are protesting because they've lost everything over the last 2 years. And you would think that, the NDP would have actually stood for the downtrodden, but that is not what they really believe. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, like you were saying, isn't it the left, isn't it the socialist parties that really care about the downtrodden and the disadvantaged? And the answer is, of course not. That is the rhetoric. What they really care about is a powerful state, and anyone who threatens the state is the enemy. And that's what we saw with Jagmeet Singh. You saw a group of people who were independently raising their voices for their freedom. And he said, we can't have that. I'm going to join with Trudeau and call them a bunch of horrible names. And that's what he did, which is exactly the opposite of what you were supposed to do if you really care about working class people.
So, yeah. Now, what do we want to watch? I put the poll up, and it was like, do we want to watch a boring old CBC story? But CBC kind of got this one right. That's the reason that I was going to include it. We might put it at the end. But Danielle Smith with Jordan Peterson. Why not just do that? So we will just...
I want to talk just for a minute, if I could, about this environmental piece, because I think that this is the problem, is that the Extinction Rebellion types, the ones who are gluing themselves to sidewalks and the top of subway cars and the headquarters of buildings, I have no idea why anyone is giving them any airtime whatsoever. That is an extremist group that I do not think represents the genuine concern that more moderate environmentalists have about the challenges that we face. I'm looking at someone like Michael Schellenberger, who has emerged as such a reasonable voice on the environment. He's very concerned about emissions, and I get that, but he also has realized that we are not going to address issues of emissions and environmental harms by focusing on wind and solar and battery power. And I think he's done some brilliant work on this, because I might also give a shout out to Michael Moore with his Planet of the Humans documentary. That kind of blew it all wide open, where we now have begun to have a conversation that, guess what? You cannot produce a wind turbine with a wind turbine, because there's a lot of steel that comes from coal, and there's a lot of fiberglass that also comes from fossil fuels, and you have to transport 1,500 truckloads to get it to a site using fossil fuels. And so until you have a situation where you've got solar and concrete and transportation fuels and fiberglass that are emissions-free, those are not emissions-free sources of production. And besides that, they're intermittent. So because they're intermittent, you have to build 3 times as many of them. And when you have to build 3 times as many of them, you're eating up a lot of landscape. And when you're eating up a lot of landscape and putting these turbines up, well, now you're also putting, if they're in the path of migratory birds, you're killing birds and bats. And why aren't we talking about all of the environmental impacts that come from that, so that we can have a fulsome discussion? This is the thing that
I think part of the reason is that people are looking for easy moral virtue, and so it's easy to be virtuous by having a messy life and saving the planet. And then it's simplest to save the planet by concentrating on one thing. And then it's simplest to concentrate on carbon dioxide, as if that's the only environmental challenge that confronts us. And so you have this overweening, prideful, and ignorant requirement to put yourself forward as some kind of planetary savior. You reduce the complexity of that problem to opposing carbon, and then if you can stick it to the rich just as an additional benefit to your envy, so much the better. No one wants to talk like Bjorn Lomborg talks about the multidimensional environmental challenges that confront us, about rank ordering them in some kind of economically intelligent way. And in treating the challenges that confront us like adults might do it, instead of like Greta Thunberg might do it. And I think the treatment that's been handed out to her is exactly emblematic of the whole problem. She's a relatively eccentric 13-year-old girl. She doesn't know anything about how the world works. And yet green leaders around the world kowtow to her like she's some sort of Dionysian prophetess. And that's a real indictment of the situation that we find ourselves in.
There's no better way to study scripture and develop a dedicated
is that we've got to elevate the voices that are aligned with this, voices like Bjorn Lomborg and voices like Michael Schellenberger, because this notion of energy density is really the key to being able to reduce the impact on the planet. And this is why Schellenberger is a supporter not only of nuclear, and small modular nuclear reactors are becoming increasingly of interest to different jurisdictions, but also he's a supporter of LNG, because you can have a smaller footprint in developing those. And when you have a smaller footprint, you're going to have, just by definition, less impact on the environment. And that, to me, I think what I worry about I call myself a libertarian conservative. Maybe we'll get into what that actually means. But what I worry about on our side of the spectrum is that we only talk in dollars and cents, and we don't address this environmental piece. This is the emotional piece that everybody cares about. I mean, I was born in 71. The first Earth Day was 1970. So I grew up surrounded by that environmental messaging. And I think we have ceded the ground to the extremists like Extinction Rebellion, and we haven't elevated the more moderate environmental voices. And that, to me, is going to be my big challenge, is that I want people to understand that, yes, we can provide energy security, yes, we can address issues of affordability, and we can do it in a way that is going to be the most environmentally responsible, bar none, looking at all of the other options and all of the other producers around the world. That is going to be, I think, our big communication challenge. But I think that's the way that we start building those allies that you're talking about in Europe.
Yeah, well, it would be great for conservatives in Canada, and I would say across the world, to reach out to people like Schellenberger and Lomborg, perhaps above all else, because they have extraordinarily well thought out arguments on the environmental front, and also are astute economically. And that's a rare combination. And the Conservatives have erred tremendously, and the central Liberals as well, the middle-of-the-road Liberals, by letting the radicals take the moral upper hand on the environment front. And their story, you look at what's going to happen in Europe and around the world, likely this winter, as we put tremendous stress on poor people by jacking up energy and food prices, is all that's going to be disastrous for the planet. In the terms that the environmentalists themselves hypothetically hold dear, the idea that we can make the planet more habitable on the environmental front by impoverishing poor people, by raising energy prices and food prices is absolutely, it's not only absurd logically, but I think it's tantamount to genocidal in its intent. It's really appalling.
It creates grave danger for those who are on fixed income going into an environment, especially in our northern climates, January, February, March, April. It's dangerous not to have reliable power, not to be able to have reliable home heating. And we have to be mindful that, as you say, the people most impacted by that are the ones at the lower end of the income scale. And so if you are forcing a senior citizen to make a choice of reducing their food bill or reducing their pharmaceuticals so that they can keep their electricity and their heating on, those are not decisions that any government should be forcing their people to make. But that's the decision this is logically where the policies of those on the extreme green left have led to, is that they are now sacrificing those at the lower end of the income scale, which they put their heart on the sleeve and they say that that's who they care about. But it is just demonstrably untrue when you see the impact of it. And I'll add one more to it. The only people that I have heard talk about the plight of those who are living in countries that do not have reliable energy and the impoverishment that occurs from it are some of the energy executives that are at our global conferences. This is part of the reason why we need to get reliable natural gas around the world, because when you look at some of the most impoverished countries in the world, they're using wood and dung and coal to heat their homes. I talked to somebody, a researcher in British Columbia, who said we have 44 million deaths per year because of indoor air quality problems. And so why is that not elevated as an issue that we know we can solve by having these secure types of energy? LNG is going to be a solution.
And specifically, that's a great question. If there were 5,000 deaths from nuclear power a year, which there aren't, the legacy press and the left-wing liberal types would be all over that like mad. But the fact that there are 40 million people or thereabouts a year who die from indoor pollution from using substandard fuels, which, by the way, are not environmentally friendly in the broader sense either, that just goes under the radar completely. And so you look at facts like that, and that's a bloody, blatant fact, that one. And it's children that are disproportionately affected on that front too. And then you also look at the willingness of the so-called leftists who are hypothetically in favor of the poor to impoverish the poor as a consequence of their non-effective green policies. And you really have to ask, well, just what the hell is driving this? And the only answer that I can think of is that it's something fundamentally predicated on envy, and that the desire to bring down the capitalist system that produces those who are richer than the typical environmentalist, let's say, that takes precedence over everything. It takes precedence over care for the poor. It takes precedence even over hypothetical care for the planet. It's like tear the bloody capitalist system down, and it doesn't matter what or who gets destroyed in the process. Because otherwise, how do you explain it? Like the indoor air pollution fact alone, it's like that's incomprehensible. Obviously, the thing to do is to get cheap energy that's clean as possible, to developing countries as fast as possible. And then, on the environmental side, the stats are pretty damn clear that if you can get the gross domestic product of a country up to something averaging approximately $5,000 US a year, then people start taking a long view and caring about the environment. And so it's quite obvious that if we did everything we could to eradicate absolute poverty, mostly by driving energy prices down, then we could get people off of their reliance on those primitive biofuels that poison them and poison the planet and denude the territory, and we could get them caring about the environment. And so why not do that?
Okay, now do you want to become Premier of Alberta? Because this is exactly the points that I want to see made on the international stage.
Sorry, gang. Yeah. So the next story is going to be this piece that I did on the Governor General. Hey everybody, what's up? Just Ehren right here at Question Period Canada. This scandal, these Liberals, they just keep coming. The scandals keep coming, but the Liberals keep getting away with it. I want Canadians to see this. They can make up their own minds, but there are scandals and they just keep getting away with wasting our tax dollars. I don't understand, but let's get into this scandal, which for some reason, the media does not cover this scandal. They don't ask any questions. I'm the only person I've seen ever do a story on this, and it is ridiculous. Wait and see. Let's get into it. It's about the Governor General, and let's do a little background on the Governor General. This story is a little confusing because it involves dry cleaning laundry and laundering money, but they're just like words that sound similar. Well, it's money washing, and well, let's find out a little bit more about money laundering.
What's the problem? I got too much money.
Is it in your mattress? Is it in a jelly jar buried in the side yard, huh?
Yeah, but the problem with having all that money is that sooner or later you're going to have to explain where it came from.
You got any ideas?
Maybe we could launder the money.
That's a great idea. Okay, how do we do that?
Way ahead of you. We declared just enough so as not to arouse suspicion, then Walt's one-time winnings become seed money for an investment.
I deposit the cash into the account of a dummy finance company. Now, then I issue you a cashier's check in his name.
Make it out to Ice Station Zebra Associates. That's my loan out. It's totally legit. It's done just for tax purposes.
You give it back to me as collateral on a loan that I make to you, but you don't pay back the loan.
So where's it all go? Oh, he down with all kind of missionary work going on down in the islands.
We got accounts with some of the banks down there. Donations come in as cash. Cashier's checks come out.
It is now laundered.
They the ones who make a path for all that street corner money. They showing all these kingpin motherfuckers how to send it overseas, bring it back, invest the shit.
If they ever trace any of those accounts, they're gonna wind up chasing a figment of my imagination.
What stop them getting to you?
Tiny ass Caribbean island, don't truck with no subpoenas, no court orders, none of that.
You got nothing on me. You know it, I know it. I'm changing dollar bills.
Hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, learning about money laundering with cool clips. Anyhow, we're going to get into the Governor General right now and what the scandal really is. The 30th and current Governor General of Canada is Mary Simon, who was sworn in on 26th of July in 2021. She's an Inuk leader from Nunavut in Quebec. Simon is the first Indigenous person to hold the office. She was nominated on July 6, 2021 to replace Julie Payette, who had resigned in January. Richard Wagner, the Chief Justice of Canada, had served as Administrator of the Government of Canada in the interim. Let's take a peek what the role includes, where it comes from, how it's chosen. The King, on the advice of his Canadian Prime Minister, appoints a Governor General to carry on the Government of Canada in the King's name, performing most of his constitutional and ceremonial duties. Yes, so King Charles, on the advice of Prime Minister Trudeau, chose Mary Simon as the 30th Governor General of Canada for his ceremonial duties. That's it, really. It's kind of a BS position. So a key factor in this story is Alan Reyes, and we have some information on him right here. He's an orphan MP, used to be a Conservative, now he's an Independent. How did that happen? Let's find out. Alan Reyes was first elected in 2015 as a Conservative for the Richmond-Athabasca area of Quebec. He remained a Conservative until 2022, when after Pierre Poilievre won the Conservative leadership race, he left the caucus. Said he couldn't see eye to eye with Pierre Poilievre. They had different views. Now we have the background, what money laundering is, who the Governor General is, how she got there, and Alan Reyes, who's trying to break this story. Let's look at the story. Alan Reyes brought this to Parliament during question period.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, after the Governor General's lavish spending on international travel, we've learned her office spent over $117,000 on dry cleaning since 2018, an average of $1,800 per month. For fun, I did some calculations based on the going rate for these services. At the rates she's been spending, that's an average of 3 outfits a day, 365 days a year. Why doesn't the government cut her $33 million budget? What are they waiting for? Because she's clearly incapable of managing taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly.
So he drops that bomb, $1,800 a month on dry cleaning for 3 years. That's a ridiculous amount of money, no doubt. The place got really quiet. Pascal Saint-On, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, had this little bit to say, and then it was over. Check it out.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Governor General has done important work for Canada. Obviously, we expect every dollar she spends to be done in a rigorous and conscientious way. Thank you.
Well, this brings to the end of question period.
We found it to be a really exciting story at the time, so we ran it, we made a video on it. It got some views, people liked it, but there was no major media covering this, and I was wondering when would the next time be that I'd hear about this story. It really sounds like money laundering to me. Put it in the comments what you think. I gotta show you more of this story. We covered it pretty well back then. It seemed like money laundering to me, but do you remember when Alan Reyes brought forth the scandal about the amount of money that was being spent on the Governor General's dry cleaning? We tried to break that story. Nobody touched it. CTV, CBC, Global, nobody touched it. We tried to break that story. So at first, this happened. Just watching it live, right here. This is all that happened. We were watching it live and caught us by surprise. Here it is. Wound up. Today he seems to be
Mr. Speaker,
pretty easy
after
going.
the Governor General's lavish
an
spending
independent.
on international travel, we've learned her office spent over $117,000 on dry cleaning since 2018, an average of $1,800 per month.
Did
For
you hear what he
fun,
just
I
said?
did some calculations based on the going rate for these services.
$1,800 a
At the
month
rates she's been spending,
since 2018
that's
on
an average
dry
of
cleaning.
3 outfits a day, 365
That's gonna
days
be an
a
issue.
year. Why doesn't the government cut her $33 million budget? What are they waiting for? Because she's clearly incapable of managing taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly.
That's embarrassing. That's going to be a thing. That's interesting. Good. Yeah, we're getting late on time.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Governor General
What is she going to
has
say to
done
that?
important work for Canada.
$33 million worth of
Obviously,
important
we
work?
expect every dollar she spends to be done in a rigorous and conscientious way. Thank
Oh,
you.
that was quick.
Well,
Not
this
even-
brings to the end of question period.
What?
I understand there's going to be a number of...
But then that story just went away. Nobody followed it up. Whatever. It's weird that nobody would follow up a scandal like that. We put out this piece trying to draw some attention. And we also criticized Alan Reyes for not following up his own story. But we've got more on that to come after this.
Mr. Speaker, every time
This
we
is
ask
Alan
questions
Reyes.
about
He
the
dropped
Governor
a scandal
General's
bomb 2
indecent
weeks ago. It was
spending,
wild.
The government gets a little offended. They pay lip service, but nothing is done to change the culture of this institution. The Governor General spends thousands on meals, alcoholic beverages, luxury
This is it.
hotels, trips,
This is
cleaning
it.
services, just to name a few. Imagine on a single plane trip, she even spent nearly
going back at
$1,000 on slices of lime and lemon. You couldn't make this up. So I repeat my question to the government.
This
Does the
is
government
awesome.
intend to cut its $33 million budget because clearly it doesn't seem to be able to manage taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly?
It's pretty great.
The Honourable Minister.
That's an interesting
Mr. Speaker,
story.
The Governor General does important work for Canada here and throughout the world. And of course, we expect all public office holders to spend every dollar with respect, with rigour, and in a conscientious way, respecting all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Last time he shut down the House with his
Malheureusement,
last
ça nous mène à la fin du...
Unfortunately,
It happened again.
concludes and brings us to the end of our question period.
This is so wild, guys. That's two times in a row
That we have
that
a few
Alan
points
Reyes
of order.
dropped the bomb
The member for Regina Capel has the floor.
and they shut it down right afterwards. It's just really funny. I'm going to have to do some investigating. We've got some more things to do this evening, I guess. So that's fun. So guys, I'm just one person I do feel like there is some journalist in me, but mostly we're here for entertainment. But that is a real story that's being ignored by CBC, CTV, Global, wherever you think you get your news from. Subscribe to my channel. It'll give you the real news. I think, like, I'm only interested in letting you know the information. I don't think that my prerogatives are the same as CBC's priorities. That's all I'm saying. Like and subscribe. It is really funny to see how it changes when you're making videos like this, like improvements you make or just changes you make, because they're not always improvements. Sometimes, most of the time it goes up. But Alan Reyes comes back, third strike. Alan Reyes, I kind of thought was just going to go away with this story, but he didn't. He came back with more. So let's take a peek at where the scandal is now and what Alan Reyes brought to Parliament again. So this is taking place on November 8th, just so you know, November 8th.
Mr. Speaker, for weeks now, I've been asking questions about the Governor General's outrageous spending. Every time I get answers from ministers who feign offense and criticize reluctantly, but do nothing to change the ingrained culture of this institution. Meanwhile, GGs come and go, but the extravagant spending on meals, booze, luxury hotels, travel, and dry cleaning marches merrily along. So I ask the Prime Minister today, does his government intend to cut her $33 million budget? Because clearly, she doesn't seem to be able to manage taxpayers' money carefully and responsibly.
So for the third time, Alan Reyes brings his concerns about the Governor General's ludicrous spending to question period. But today, Justin Trudeau is in the House, so we'll get a straight answer about the Governor General's spending, won't we?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Governor General, Mary Simon, is an upstanding, humane, caring person, and she plays an important role in our society and democracy. We will continue to see to it that her spending is managed appropriately, but the fact is she has a very important role for the stability and future of our democracy. Unfortunately.
And unfortunately, this concludes question period.
That right there is why I can't trust Trudeau anymore. This scandal, and that's how he defends it, says that she's an upstanding, caring, wonderful person, whatever. This ludicrous spending is being ignored. I don't know why the scandal isn't being touched by major media. We're covering it and trying to get the story out there so that you know, trying to make Canadian politics fun. I don't know where this goes. We'll be following it. Just holding true to our word that we are following this. This scandal, the Governor General, ludicrous spending, sounds like, smells like, looks like money laundering. I don't know. How do they get away with it? These liberals and our tax dollars, right? Like, now we're on credit, like bragging about some AAA rating for being able to borrow money. Why would a nation like ours need to borrow money? Like, come on.
Subscribe,
it's
and
ludicrous.
comment. That'd be great.
I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We're having fun with Canadian politics right here. What is up with the Governor General's spending? Come on. All right, gang. So we're back, and I'm not sure what we're going to do for the next hour. Like, I scheduled that first hour pretty good, or pretty well, but I don't know what we're going to do for the next. I do have options. People are engaged by Danielle Smith, right? Like, I am. Like, when I watch her, and this, I don't want to show you stuff that's old, though. Like, or real, unless it's old, it's got to be really old. Here. Let's make an executive decision very quickly. And we're going with this.
The following to appear on the dates to be fixed by the chair. 1, the Minister of Health, the Honourable Mark Holland. 2, the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc. And 3, other witnesses whose names shall be provided by the parties to the clerk of the committee within 1 week of the adoption of this motion. and report its findings to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to move this motion. I'm just going to speak briefly to it so we can all have a say on this motion and get it to a vote. Mr. Chair, we finally got the documents relating to the Winnipeg lab. My view is that this is the start of the matter, not the end. The collection of evidence is usually the start of a process, not the completion of it. And so really we're leaving off where we left 3 years ago when the Canada-China Committee in the previous Parliament asked for the Winnipeg lab documents. I believe strongly that the committee is the right place to examine these documents, the right place to hold the government accountable, and the right place for us to hear from witnesses and to produce a report with recommendations. Mr. Chair, this is a grave and serious matter, as CSIS highlighted in its intelligence and assessment it's submitted to the Public Health Agency of Canada, which are contained, an assessment which is contained in the documents we received. It's a grave and serious matter because a government scientist clandestinely collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China and was paid clandestinely by the government and the military of the People's Republic of China without the government of Canada knowing. And so these serious national security breaches, I believe, warrant examination by a parliamentary committee. It's now been 4 weeks since we received the documents, which is the reason, Mr. Chair, as you know, I've called this emergency meeting so that we can make a decision, I hope, in favor of holding hearings on these documents. It took us 3 years to get the documents. It's now taken us 4 weeks for us to have a discussion about whether or not a committee should look at these documents. I think we should have done that almost immediately upon receiving the documents. So the motion in front of us will allow us to examine these serious national security breaches. It will allow us to examine the flow of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada and to get answers to questions such as the following. Why wasn't this caught earlier than September 2018? Why did it take 10 months for the government to secure the lab? When the first red flag went up, according to the documents, the first red flag went up in September of 2018 when a patent was discovered to have been registered in the People's Republic of China, which is contrary to government policy and contrary to Canadian law. It then took 10 months for the lab to be secured on July 5th, 2019. In my view, an unacceptably long period of time for that to happen. We also need to examine why it took us 3 years to get the documents. The minister has indicated that it was up to public servants that made the decision on what information to release to the committee. We need to examine what is wrong with the information flow between the Government of Canada and Parliament.
Hey everybody, what's up? Just Ehren here, question period, Canada. You know how most politicians, like we know, they're all clowns, but some of them seem like legitimate people, like maybe they're relatable even. Ben Lobb is an MP from Ontario. He's a wild guy, but he's big into agriculture and fighting, and has been fighting for this carbon tax to be relieved of Canadians, especially Canadian farmers. Bill C-234 was his baby, but it got smashed in the Senate, and they're still trying to keep that above board, breathing, like alive, and maybe they're going to do it. He sounds like he's still fighting for Canadian farmers.
Can I get your reaction to the latest with C-234, your private member's bill?
Obviously, I feel disappointed for Canadian farmers. The amendment that was passed last night, in a way, guts the bill and really diminishes the opportunity that was there so close to have a good result for Canadian farmers. And I mentioned in the House of Commons yesterday pork farmer just down the road from where I grew up. His natural gas bill for the month of February was $4,300, and the carbon tax charge on that bill was $3,300. So obviously, that's not fair, and the senators who are Liberal-appointed senators that voted for the amendment, I really don't know what they're thinking, because they really missed the boat on this one and could have provided a great opportunity for farmers. Pork farming and other commodity type farming is not high margin business, it's low margin, and every little bit helps, and this would have been a great help for them.
What are the next steps now from your side of things?
Well, it's quite a procedural study, I think you would say. There's a lot of different opportunities. I think it still depends on if there's more amendments to come. If there's any other, the Liberal-appointed senators that want to put any more amendments forward, that really will be up to them, of course, with their independence they have over there in the Senate. And then I think eventually there will be a final vote, and then it likely will be coming back to the House of Commons, I think. So it's long. I think it's still going to be quite a long ways. But obviously, the amendment that passed last night really did a lot of damage to the full intent of the bill. So,
I was going to say, given, I mean, it did pass the House the first time around. Do you think that there's room for it to come back to the House and the amendments be stripped and
that all can happen? Yes. Yeah.
Do you think there's enough will there to do that?
I think.
My name is Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. You just laid out the tough economic times that Canadians are facing. You say you're seized with the issue. Did you consider that backdrop when you decided to take an $80,000 free vacation?
Still have sand in his ears from his Jamaican vacation.
I thank my honourable colleague for his question. But being a farmer, I fully understand how important environmental plan is for the government. I'm sorry, but his party does not have an environmental plan. We as a government do have an environmental plan.
So, but I mean, the time frame is a lot longer when you have to bring it back this way. In the normal course of a private member's, there's second reading, which is a limited amount of time, third reading, and the committee. So it is a very finite amount of time. This is unlimited, unless there's some rural Liberal MPs that are able to make the case to the broader Liberal Party that it's already been dealt with at the House of Commons. Let's just get it dealt with and move on, because I think obviously they likely have heard from their constituents, and some of the Liberal members of Parliament from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and certainly Prince Edward Island, and even a guy like Adam Van Couverton, who does have a little bit of a rural part in his Milton riding. They would have all been hearing from their farmers about this, and they know what the message would be from them.
Can I ask you, this is your private member's bill. Private member's bills are not always easy to get through. It was kind of at the final stages in the Senate here. What has this process been like for you? How are you feeling with your bill being at this point now? Well,
I would say it was a team effort, to be honest. Like John Barlow did a great job, and a lot of the other members of Parliament on Ag Committee and the rural members, they have as much ownership in this as I do, I feel. And David Wells he's a fantastic individual, and so he's a really collegial type person to take a bill on like this. So it's been a good learning experience, even though I've been around a long time. The Senate, you really learn it is a different setup than it is in the House of Commons. So good learning all the way around.
How are you feeling though about it at this point now that there was all these potentials for it to be, like you said, quite a time before it could potentially be passed?
I played a lot of sports in my life, and I know that it's never really over until you get the last out in the ninth inning, and we're not quite in the last out in the ninth inning. It might be the top of the ninth, but it's not the bottom of the ninth.
Thanks for. I'll ask you one more question. Do you think that this bill would have had a different trajectory if the Liberals hadn't gone ahead and done the carve out on home heating fuel in the Atlantic and had already done that thing, and that's the reason this bill is now not sailing through, or do you think they're not connected?
It's a good question. It's hard to say. I think maybe in one way, originally I thought maybe because some of the senators had defended it so much, why they should vote against it, and then the Prime Minister did a carve out, maybe they might have felt a little betrayed that, you know, they've held the line for him in the Senate, and then he did that, but, you know, it was only one vote, so, and it was pretty close. I think that's just how close it is, but we'll see. We'll see. And then, of course, there's been at least 5 or 6 senators appointed since my bill has been in the Senate too. So that didn't, you know, you take those 5 out and it passes. Or, you know, the motion, the amendment would have failed last night. So anyhow, that's good.
For stopping to talk.
Thanks, Ben.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
So that video is from about 6 weeks ago, and the Liberals have remarkably dug their heels in even deeper on this battle. Let's see how things are going with that bill now.
Stop and talk a minute about what you're anticipating might happen or not happen with that.
Well, that's a great question. We'll have to see what the other parties are planning on doing. My estimation is that the Bloc and the NDP and the Green Party will continue to support it. It's pretty rare that a private member's bill gets sent back from the Senate. There's just a few times in the last 10 years or more that that's actually happened, so we'll see how it goes.
What are Canadians' priorities right now going into this sitting?
What are Canadians' priorities? Well, I think Canadians' priorities is obviously inside their household, and it's the cost of living, it's the cost of their mortgage, it's the cost of their car payment if they have one, it's the cost of their bills. And I mean, if you think about it now, here we are at the end of January, there's going to be a big heating bill come likely in February for January. So they're thinking about that, and they're likely still thinking about paying for Christmas. So it's a lot on Canadians' plates right now, and it doesn't matter if you're, you know, a family of 4 or you're a retired couple at home in a city or a small town. It's very expensive to live right now.
Ben, back to your bill. Do the Conservatives plan to accept the amendments the Senate made to it?
No, that's another procedural thing everybody would be interested in, and so there's an opportunity for the, I guess you'd call it the author of the private member's bill to reject those amendments, and so I did that last week or 2 weeks ago and filed it. So when it's brought up tomorrow for debate, first thing in the morning, it'll be like it was 2 years ago in its original form. Okay?
Thanks very much.
To me, that just seems like a legitimate person, a nice guy. Ben Lobb seems like he's a pretty good guy. Like, these politicians are really hard to trust, I find, anyhow. These are a couple of other ones that we'll be doing stories on in the near future.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, it's clear the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He gave us 3 different versions of his Jamaican vacation. First, he claimed he was paying all the expenses for his family's stay. Secondly, he claimed he was staying at no cost at a location owned by a family friend. And then he claimed that he and his family stayed with friends. Now, all 3 different versions cannot be accurate at the same time. Which version did he tell the Ethics Commissioner?
Here, here. 8 years, senior public servants have spoken out about lies and abusive process in the Arrive scam scandal. We've now learned that shortly after their critical whistleblowing testimony, these senior public servants were put on leave without pay. They were told they were under investigation less than 3 weeks after their testimony, and they were suspended before the investigation had even concluded. This NDP Liberal government is punishing public servants for their Arrive Can testimony. What are these Liberals trying to hide with this retaliation and intimidation of witnesses?
Here, here. Why are you hiding? 8 years, this Prime Minister, he's just not worth the chaos and crime. Mr. Speaker, Canadian businesses across the country are being extorted by international gangsters because of the NDP Liberal government's ideological soft on crime policies. Businesses and family homes are being shot at. In Edmonton, since November, over a dozen houses under construction by different home builders have been burnt down. It was this government that made it easier for criminals to get bail and allowed for shorter jail terms by scrapping mandatory minimum sentences. Mr. Speaker, when will they start cracking down on serious crime?
predecessor who was fired from the gig. You cannot live in a photo op. The videos won't bring warmth to the 300,000 people without homes. His tweets won't help the single mom who's trying to make her mortgage payment next month. And his press conferences will not help the thousands of young people trying to move out of their parents' basement. Why won't he stop subsidizing the bureaucracy who are blocking construction and focus on getting builders with shovels in the ground?
That's right. Just a quick look at some of the politicals that we'll be examining. There are some really cool people in this Conservative Party, like Lanceman is one of them, Uppel is one of them. There are so many, like Barlow is cool, Barrett is cool. There's a long list. I'm not a conservative. I'm a libertarian. Like, I believe in much less government than we have in Canada. But these are the options that it looks like Canadians have. And in my opinion, the best option we have reasonably for the next election are going to be the Conservatives, Poilievre, hopefully with a majority. So maybe some drastic changes could take place. Who knows? Like, it's the government, right? Like, we might get, like, kind of screwed on that end too, but it's better to hope, right? Like, and a Band-Aid over a gushing wound is better than just a gushing wound. Not to be like that. Like, we're having fun here with Canadian politics, and we are learning a lot. I do need you to do me this favor. Let me know what you'd like to see about the videos, that just what you'd like to see. Imagine like what we could do here. I can probably do whatever. I just don't know what that is, and so I'm just doing these things that I'm doing, hoping that people like it. But now, like, I think we're building an audience where we can interact and they can tell me what they want to see. Like, if they want to see the whole question and answer, we can do that. We do that, like, in our live stuff, and I just need to be told, like, what people really do want to see more of. Anyway, we're having a lot of fun with it, and it's going very well. My name's Ehren, this is Question Period Canada, having fun with Canadian politics. Hoping that everybody had something healthy to eat and are going to be able to stay warm tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We hit 10,000 subscribers, guys. Like, we're going to grow. So share it with somebody, like, get notified. We've got videos coming. Hey everybody, what's up? Question Period Canada, Ehren right here. We've got something new for you. These are the highlights. Check this out. Let's go. Up first, Andrew Scheer takes on Jenna Sudds and Chrystia Freeland, puts them down.
8 years, Canadians are learning the hard way that the Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. And the latest food price report shows that Canadians are bracing for another devastating blow next year, with families being forced to pay over $700 more for groceries. And that's on top of all the price increases the Prime Minister's carbon tax and inflationary deficits have already caused. Instead of making food more expensive with planned tax hikes, why don't the Liberals support our common sense plan to take the carbon tax off of families, First Nations, and farmers?
Speaker, well, the Conservatives continue to do all that they can to paralyze government. We are here to work on behalf of Canadians, and happy to do so, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to make the necessary investments in our social programs, in Canada Child Benefit, in our $10 a day National Early Learning and Child Care Program. These programs are transformational for Canadian families, saving them hundreds of dollars each and every month. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work hard on behalf of Canadian families.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
The transformation devastation that this government has caused to families is that working people now have to go to food banks after 8 years of this Prime Minister. Let me read you a quote from that food price report. Canadians are reducing their expenditures on groceries, either by reducing the quantity or quality of food they are buying. This is unbelievable. This is in Canada. We used to have a high quality of life, especially for working people, and now those people with jobs are having to put water in their milk or literally go hungry. Do the Liberals not realize what they've done to this country, and when will they finally take the tax off so food prices can come down?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to supporting the least vulnerable in Canada. Let's review the facts, Mr. Speaker. UNICEF came out with a report just this month where they showed that child poverty in Canada has decreased by 22% compared to where they left Canadians under our government. 2.3 million more Canadians have been lifted out of poverty under our government. They know how to cut. They don't know how to support Canadians.
Up next, some French people are really sensitive about the Magdalen Islands.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, from the beginning, please. Mr. Speaker, I was suggesting that the minister leave the Magdalen Islands and walk the streets of Montreal because today is the Grand Guignolé des Médias food drive in Quebec. People are on the streets asking for help because food banks are overflowing. Will this government finally understand people's desperation and listen to reason? A family of 4 will pay $700 more next year for groceries. So instead of wanting to tax even more with the help of the Bloc Québécois, can the government have a little heart and cancel the carbon tax, which isn't working, and that will finally help our farmers and families? The Honourable Fisheries and Oceans and Coast Guard Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely shameful to talk that way about people of the Magdalen Islands. That is absolutely shameful, Mr. Speaker. He should be ashamed to speak ill of those people from my region, Madam Speaker. Shame, he should be ashamed.
Now we've got some liberals that are crazy about the Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of International Trade on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I've been speaking with Ukrainian Canadian Congress branches across Canada, and they've been telling me how important this agreement is, both to Canada's economy, to Ukraine's economy, and to Ukraine's rebuild. Now, it's been over a week since the Ukrainian Canadian Congress wrote to the leader of the Conservative Party to express their disappointment in the fact that every single Conservative MP voted against the agreement and to urge them to support it. Still, Conservatives oppose it. Could the minister reassure Canadians that despite Conservative opposition and obstruction, this government will stand with the Ukrainian people until they win?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, Ukrainians have a word for the Conservative position on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Nitsa. Nonsense. It's nonsense to call this agreement woke. It's nonsense to not stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty. It is nonsense to suggest that this agreement puts a price on pollution on Ukraine, because they've had a price on pollution since 2011.
Absolutely.
President Zelensky wants this agreement. The rest of this House voted for this agreement. Why won't the Conservatives vote for this agreement?
Kyle Seaback tries to cast a spell on Chrystia Freeland. She's a witch, can't do it.
Mr. Speaker, the finance minister wants to talk numbers. That's great. Let's talk about the 2 million Canadians that visited a food bank in one single month as a result of this NDP Liberal government. 800,000 Ontarians went to the food bank. It would be the 3rd largest city in Ontario dependent on a food bank for food. This finance minister says she won't take lessons. Even a 3rd grader could figure out they have destroyed Canadians and driving them to food banks. And they could fix it if they cared, Mr. Speaker. All they have to do, take the carbon tax off for families, First Nations, and farmers.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for Canada.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, for once we heard something true from the Conservatives. Yes, the finance minister does believe in talking about numbers. So let's talk about some numbers. 1.1 million more jobs in Canada than before COVID. 8 out of 10 Canadians have more money in their pockets thanks to the carbon price. And you know what? Last week I was in Edmonton, one of the largest investments in Canadian history, more than $11 billion from Dow. You know why? Because of our price on pollution. That's what the Dow CEO told us, the underpinning of his investment.
Did it just get colder in here? We better call in Shannon Stubbs to heat it up.
Again from the top, please, but I'd ask her to be careful in the language that she uses. The honourable member from Lakeland.
The constituents of Calgary Skyview will hold the MP to account for his betrayal of their constituents, and he'll pay at the ballot box. Bill C-50 is the top-down just transition that will end oil and gas in Canada in favour of dictator and U.S. oil. The NDP Liberals know it will kill 170,000 oil and gas jobs immediately and hurt 2.7 million Canadians working in transportation, construction, agriculture, and manufacturing on top of it. It will make power and fuel prices skyrocket. The NDP Liberals also know it will hurt Indigenous and visible minority Canadians the worst. It's never been more clear that Canadians cannot afford the colluding, costly cover-up coalition.
Order. The honourable member. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Those are the highlights from today's question period, December 7th. It was a lot of fun. CHYSTIA Freeland's always trying to keep it so cold, but Shannon Stubbs is heating it up. So are the Conservatives, putting pressure on these Liberals. My name's Ehren, Question Period Canada. Like and subscribe. We're having a great time with Canadian politics. Catch you next video. Thanks for
You know, and what he's bringing in a ban on hunting rifles. C-21 plus the OIC targeted dozens of hunting rifles in addition to BB guns, airsoft guns, paint guns, and countless other things that he wants to ban. He's openly said he wants to ban hunting rifles. Now, make no mistake, if Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister after the next election, he will ban all civilian firearms. No doubt about it. He's made it clear that that's what he wants to do. He has said it, and he has published 300 pages of rifles that he wants to ban. Now, your local Liberal MP will put on a show about how he voted on C-21, but here's the bottom line. As long as he's keeping Justin Trudeau in the Prime Minister's office, Trudeau can use that power through a cabinet order to arbitrarily list any of your rifles and ban them from your use. That is the reality. And until your Liberal MP leaves the Liberal caucus and withdraws his support from Justin Trudeau, he is supporting Trudeau's ban on your hunting rifles. My common sense plan is to, all right, yeah. All right. So there's one person in all of Yukon that wants to ban hunting rifles. Maybe I think it was a CBC reporter over there. So here's my common sense plan, folks. We're going to target the real criminals. Instead of targeting hunters in Nunavut or Labrador or Yukon, they're not the ones shooting up downtown Toronto. The firearms violence, which by the way is up 100% under Justin Trudeau, is the result of illegal gun smuggling from the United States of America. It is not the result of lawful, licensed, trained and tested PAL and RPAL owners. So, I'm going to repeal Trudeau's ban on hunters and sport shooters. I'm going to take the savings from canceling the gun grab and put it into bolstering our borders to keep the illegal guns and drugs out of our country, and I'll put the criminals in jail. In other words, we're going to go after the real bad guy. Money, of course, is merely a technology by which we transport value over time and space. And without it, our species would have to consume in the present everything that it produces. Most species do. They have to eat what they kill right away, lest it be stolen or spoiled. Sure, squirrels can squirrel away a little bit, a good habit the government should learn from, but most species have to use it or lose it. We developed a technology that would allow two people who are exchanging things to go ahead with their exchange even if each did not have the ability to supply the other with something that the other wanted. They could simply use this technology called money in order to transport the value between each other across time and around different geographies. And so over time, money has taken many forms. In one South Pacific island, it was just a ledger carved on scarce limestone. In some places, it's been beads or seashells. In prisons, they use cigarettes. In school, they used to use candy when I was a kid. Throughout history, it became metal, some precious, some brute. We had gold, we had silver, we had copper. Many different means of translating value across space and time have been used, but politicians have found it a nuisance to pay their bills using money with integrity. You know, because back in 1215, poor old King John was forced by the barons and the commoners to sign this nuisance of a document called the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And in that document was inscribed the principle that the Crown could not tax what the people had not approved. And that principle is still in place here in this Parliament today. Government can't spend what we don't vote on 800 years later. And you look around and see the beautiful green here. You know where that comes from, of course. It's because that was the color of the fields in which King John was made low. And that green should remind everyone that the people in the fields who are actually doing the work, they're the ones that produce the money that we spend around here. That might have been a better answer in the committee than a government's broader macroeconomic framework, Mr. Speaker. But I digress. But you see what happened after King John was prevented from going on taxing what people had not approved. He was forced to go back to the commoners to get their permission to take their money. He and his successors would become increasingly creative in sourcing the cash that they acquired. Years later, King Henry VIII, who is more famous for clipping off the heads of his subjects, decided that he could get his hands on money by clipping coins. He and his regime would clip off the edge of the coin, and that way they could melt those edges down and make more coins. And back then it was hard to make coins because it was the British pound, which was a pound of silver. And by clipping off a piece, you could melt it down and create more coins, and John could inflate the value of currency in his hands, thereby deflating the value of the wages that his peasant class earned. He got even more creative later on. This is how he got his famous nickname. He would actually have his minters melt down the British pound, and he would re-mint it with just a tiny coat of silver around the outside of a copper coin. So people would think they were getting a silver coin. Meanwhile, on the inside, what they actually got was copper. The problem is, being the egomaniac that he was, facing outward from the coin, he didn't want a profile shot. His face was on the coin, and it stared everyone in the eye when they looked at that coin. But his nose protruded the farthest out, and when it was in people's pockets, it would rub against the inside of the pocket, and the silver would scrape off the tip of his nose, meaning that you have a silver coin with a red nose, and thus he got the nickname Old Copper Nose. And every time someone saw that red copper nose, they knew the king had stolen the real value of their money. throughout time, other politicians have found other creative ways. The dictator Dionysius, who was a Greek dictator in Syracuse, he actually took all the coins, the 1 drachma coins, and he stamped them with a 2. So all of a sudden he had twice as much money. Now I hesitate to tell that story in this House because I worry that this Prime Minister might think that he could do the same. You know, if you run out of money, if you run out of money, he'll say, you can always get more. You'll turn loonies to toonies and toonies to fours. That might be the next creative idea by which government could get its hands on money. And throughout the 20th century, we saw this same tactic of cash creation in, of course, with the most famous example was in the early 1920s in Germany. They had created so many new units of account that inflation ran rapid out of control. You needed to have a wheelbarrow full of cash in order to buy a loaf of bread. And if you got to the bar to try and drink away your inflationary blues, you ordered all your beer at the beginning of the night because as the minutes went on, it became more expensive. And of course, we in this part of the world have not been immune to this inflationary disease ourselves. While in the post-war era, we inherited monstrous debts fighting the fascists, but governments had hard money from the end of the war until the early 70s. We basically operated on an American-led standard whereby you could, if you had a U.S. greenback, you could exchange it at a rate of $35 per ounce of gold. And in that period, of course, we had an enormous amount of prosperity. The Americans paid off their war debts. Here in Canada, with solid currency, we wrestled the inflationary beast to the ground in the post-war era. We took our record debts that we inherited from the war. We paid them off. We increased the size of the Canadian economy by 300%. And by 1933, we had basically become a debt. In 1973, we had basically become a debt-free country. But then what happened in the 1970s? Well, President Nixon wanted to spend on warfare and welfare. Of course, the Americans were bogged down in Vietnam, which was costly an enterprise, and President Nixon wanted to keep his popularity at home, so he decided to spend. And in the decade that followed 1971, not only did they unleash the American dollar from any particular standard, but they increased the number of U.S. dollars in circulation by 150%, while output only grew by about 39%. In other words, the amount of money grew about 4 times faster than the amount of underlying output that money represented. Now, here in Canada, we had Pierre Trudeau, and he looked down at all the inflation that the U.S. government was creating. They had reached double-digit inflation down there, a total inflationary crisis. The American dollar was devalued on an international basis and, of course, was incapable of buying affordable petroleum on the world market. They liked to blame OPEC, but they took no responsibility for the fact that the unit with which they were buying oil on the international markets was itself devalued. So Trudeau says, he looks down at all the misery in the United States. He looked at how people were lined up at gas stations trying to wait for an hour and a half in order to gas up their cars. He saw the poverty that was overtaking inner city streets. He saw the expanding wealth gap in the United States of America. And what did Pierre Trudeau say to all that? He said, let's have some of that up here. And so he started printing some money here in Canada and massively increased the money supply with which Canada, I just have the data right here. Between 1971 and 1981, the money supply in Canada grew by over 200%, while GDP only grew in real terms by about 47%. So you can imagine, money is growing in supply at more than 4 times the rate as the economy is growing. So you have more dollars chasing fewer goods, and what do you get? Inflation. That's right. That is, we learned that, all of us, we learned that in grade school, but apparently some lessons need to be learned and relearned here in this House of Commons.
Resuming debate.
The honourable member for
Resuming debate. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. I always like to fill the room with suspense. And thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I will be splitting my time with the Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindipore. After 8 years, we've had an opportunity to assess the results of the latest grand experiment. We know the experiment we're always told we need to conduct. The experiment is that socialist parties come along and tell voters that life's not fair, that there's too much greed, and the solution to greed is for government to get big and powerful, take the people's money, and spread it around in a way that's fair, so everybody gets their rightful due. Now, of course, the question is who actually gets to carve up the spoils and decide who gets what? Well, the answer, of course, is government itself, and government makes its decision based on politics. Of course, politics is based on, unfortunately, influence, and those with influence tend to be those with money. And as a result, those with money can convert that money into political power, and that power back into yet more money, and that money back into more political power, and the cycle goes and goes and goes. And so while the promise was that the government would get grand and powerful and take from the rich to give to the middle class and those working hard to join them, remember those people? We don't hear about them very much anymore after 8 years. In fact, in practice, the game is played very differently. Let's talk about the question, the very simple question of public finance. From whom to whom? So from whom has the money come, and to whom is it going? Let's start about from whom. The money is coming from the working class people of this country who are under a siege not seen in at least 40 years. Inflation has reached a 40-year high as the cost of government has bid up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits have increased the cost of the goods we buy and the interest we pay. So the real human impact of this highly predictable economic phenomenon is that 67% of Canadians now agree that everything feels broken in Canada. We have 9 of 10 young people who don't own homes say they never will. We have students now, according to media reports, living in homeless shelters while they study. We have 1.5 million people eating at a food bank in a single year, some of whom asking food bank presidents for help with suicide, with medical assistance in dying, not because they're sick, but because the poverty that they experience after 8 years of this Prime Minister is so insufferable that they would rather end their misery altogether. We have mortgage payments. The average mortgage payment has doubled from $1,500 to over $3,200. The average rent payment in our 10 biggest metropolitan centers has doubled as well. So the people, by the way, food prices are up 12%, energy prices have off and on experienced inflation of at times 100% year over year. And by the way, these are the commodities that make up a much larger part of the budgets of the low income and working class people. So and the answer to the question of from whom is, of course, Canada's working class people, the people who get out of bed every day, who do the nation's labor. They are the ones who are paying the bills for this experiment. So the second part of the question is to whom? Who's getting all this benefit? Because I think when we look around our communities, we don't see a lot of people putting up their hand and saying, boy, I sure have received a windfall. I don't know how many constituents of the members in this chamber here today are getting $1,500 an hour contracts from this government. No, zero. We are talking about a very small group of people who are getting these benefits. And who are they? Well, let's start chronologically. Let's go back. Let's start with SNC-Lavalin, right? This is a perfect example of the experiment of which I speak. They went to a socialist country called Libya. Libya, the word socialist is actually in the republic's name. And so you would think they'd want nothing to do with a multinational. Well, of course, that multinational bought influence and stole over $100 million from the poorest people in Africa. Now, the Prime Minister was not going to let a company like that face criminal charges, so he actually fired his Attorney General because she refused to have those charges dropped. So we see the Prime Minister protecting a corporation that had stolen from Africa's poorest people, a corporation that of amongst the most privileged people on planet Earth. After that, we saw the Prime Minister give grants, multi-million-dollar grants to Loblaw to pay for fridges, to credit card companies, highly profitable credit card companies, to provide them with corporate subsidies. Recently, his finance minister was confronted about the plan in the budget to fund $2 billion to a company that does not exist. And the finance minister, when she heard that allegation, said that is absolutely false. It's not $2 billion, it's $15 billion. But we can imagine who's going to benefit from that. And now, McKinsey. Now, the Prime Minister gave a glowing speech about his non-friend, the non-friend he likes to hug, Dominic Barton, who said that he had hired Mr. Barton for $1 a year. Somehow $1 became $50 million, and then it became $100 million, and then it was $120 million. And because the price tag keeps rising, I actually asked the Prime Minister now, close to a dozen times in the House of Commons, what is the total dollar value of all the contracts the Prime Minister has paid this company after 8 years, and he still can't answer the question. But we know that they're making a lot of money, and according to the government departments that hired them, in many cases did no work of any value. And so the public servants who could have done the job themselves say this company came in with a bunch of fancy charts and graphs and the latest MBA-isms and made off with millions, and no one can actually figure out what they did for the money. That's to whom the money is going. In fact, this government has increased the budget for high-priced consultants by nearly 100% to over $15 billion. For context, we have 15 million families in Canada. So that means each family is spending $1,000 in federal taxes for high-priced consultants. That's to whom your money is going. So if you are sitting at home wondering why your paycheck evaporates in federal taxes and asking where it all goes, well, that is one answer to the question. Now, should we be surprised that these are the people that are getting all the money? Well, wouldn't you expect it? This is the circle this government travels in. These are the friends that they hang out with at Davos. And none of my members went to Davos. That's right. We're not going to Davos. We stayed in our communities while the meeting in Davos was happening recently. We work for our people on the ground, the common people. This is the House of Commons, and the common people deserve to have a voice in the House of Commons. You know, and so we learned the lesson here that just because the state takes over the economy doesn't mean it transforms human nature. It doesn't mean that it abolishes greed. It just redirects greed. You know, as Macaulay might say, if I might paraphrase him, wherever you throw the carrion, the raven's croak is loud. Wherever you fling the honey, the buzzing flies will crowd. Wherever down river garbage floats, the greedy pike you see. And wheresoever such lord is found, such client soon will be. Macaulay referred to the flies chasing the honey. Flies don't make honey, they take honey. Bees make honey. And that's the kind of difference we have. When the government runs the economy, you get rich by taking. When you have a free market economy, you get better off by making. Almost imagine the conversation between the Liberal Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, who was found guilty of breaking the ethics law, and the Prime Minister, who's twice been found guilty of breaking the ethics law, saying, how are we going to quit getting found guilty? I know, we'll appoint my sister-in-law as the ethics commissioner. What a plan. It is foolproof, Mr. Speaker. My question, though, is when are they, the problem is pretty soon they're going to run out of family and friends, and after they do, how are they going to avoid their next conviction for breaking the law? Fraudulent CERB recipients was the question. How many?
Minister.
9 million Canadians supported by CERB.
Member for Carleton.
So the only number we're getting was 9 million when I asked how many people took the CERB that didn't live in Canada. If 9 million isn't the right number, which number is?
Minister. Maybe the honourable member would like to know about CEBA that helped over 898,000 small businesses survive.
Member for Carleton.
Why is the minister hiding the true number of people not living in Canada who got the CERB?
Minister.
Following a steep decline of 27% in the first half of 2020, corporate profits rebounded to 61% above pre-pandemic levels.
Member for Carleton.
Could we replace the minister with a cassette tape that we could just hit play on?
I guess that's a question for the minister. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure there's all kinds of technological advancements available, but I can tell you that the wage subsidy helped over 450,000 employers.
Member for Carleton.
5.3 million.
Is there a technological advance that might help the minister answer the question?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the rent subsidy helped more than 213,000 businesses stay afloat. That's good for all Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
Can the officials who are here today hand the minister a new script? He seems to be reading one unrelated to the questions. We're talking about some kid who made one mistake when he was 19. We're talking about people who do 60, 70 violent offenses. And then because they're criminals.
But why are they criminals?
Because they do crime.
And why do they do crime?
Because we let them out early on bail.
So because they
I think we've solved the riddle here.
But don't worry about crime, because Justin Trudeau is going to ban hunting, right? He's going to stop the hunters in Sudbury and Nunavut, and that's going to end. I actually asked him what he was going to do about the stabbings that are happening. He actually said he was going to ban guns. Seriously? Is he going to ban butter knives?
Important for the honourable member across the way to understand that our government helped 9 million Canadians who lost their job through the CERB.
They hand him a speech that they wrote for him, a bureaucrat wrote for him, and he just stays glued to it. I mean, why don't we just elect a robot to read off these speeches that are written by bureaucrats in the finance department? Because that robot at least would stick more tightly to the script than he has. If he doesn't actually have any answers to the factual questions, is it possible that he could be replaced with a robot?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that the member opposite doesn't like the answers that I'm providing, but I know the Canadians do.
Violent gun crime is up 101%, right? Here's why. Criminals don't follow gun laws. You don't stop to get a possession and an acquisition license on the way to robbing a bank.
Consumer confidence that went to an all-time low. It's back. That's good for business. That's good for Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
One last time, FinTrack, which is responsible for monitoring monies that are misappropriated in organized crime and money laundering, indicates that many people receive the CERB even though they don't even live in Canada. I'm going to ask one last time, how many was that?
Minister.
The member knows that FinTrack is independent. What we know is consumer confidence is back, that people are able to pay their bills thanks to our historic investments in their lives and in their livelihoods.
Member for Carleton.
What has been the inflation rate for the price of land in the last year?
Minister.
I'm glad to talk about inflation because we know that it's a global phenomenon.
Member for Carleton.
Land prices are a global phenomenon. Does the minister realize that the land we have here doesn't come from the rest of the globe? It's already here?
Minister.
I think you can read Hansard, and as the honourable colleague can, I said very clearly, inflation is a global phenomenon.
Member for Carleton.
Landflation, how much?
Minister.
Our inflation is in line with peer countries around the world. And in fact, we're doing much better than the United States, Mexico, and countries in the Eurozone.
Member for Carleton.
The question was about land price inflation. How much have land prices inflated in the last year?
Minister.
Land price is part of the basket of goods in inflation. Our inflation is in line with peer countries.
Member for Carleton.
He's allowed to say he doesn't know.
All right, well, so that came to a very quick ending. So, guys, we're going to wrap it up with this. We have another piece that we're going to show, and I'm not going to host it. I'm just going to show it. This is the RCMP's review of the internal audit review investigation into the mass shooting in Nova Scotia during the COVID pandemic. It's not good. It's pretty depressing. And we're putting it at the ass end of the show for a particular reason. We don't want people to drop off, but also we want people to see it if they're curious about that. The RCMP sucks, guys. They're not good at their jobs. And anyhow, thank you all so much for hanging out. Happy Easter, Good Friday, all that stuff. Ehren, this is Question Period Canada. We watch daily politics here. We have a few new people in the room that maybe are still in the room, and I invite any younger audience. I love the more senior audience as well. They're really cool. It's so easy to get along with you folks. But we do want some younger people watching. I don't know how to do that. It's politics. It's a hard commodity to sell to younger folks. Like, they just aren't interested, or what? You explain it to me. I don't know. Anyways, we're going to go out on this RCMP piece, and it's them evaluating their...
We will now proceed with question and answers, starting from your left to your right in the first row. We ask media that you limit yourself to one question and one follow-up, please. For the benefit of all participants, please provide your name, the outlet you represent, and to whom your question is directed. We will begin with those in the room, and then followed with media joining us by phone. For questions asked in French to Assistant Commissioner Daly, I will first translate them into English. Assistant Commissioner Daly will provide his answer in English, and I will provide the same response in French. Nous allons maintenant procéder à la période des questions et réponses. Nous vous demandons de vous limiter à une question et un suivi. Pour le bénéfice de tous les participants, veuillez indiquer votre nom, l'organisation que vous représentez et à qui s'adresse la question. Nous commencerons par les journalistes présents dans la salle, suivis par ceux qui nous rejoignent par téléphone. Nous commençons par votre gauche allant vers la droite dans la première rangée. Pour les questions posées en français au commissaire adjoint Daly, je les traduirai d'abord en anglais. Le commissaire adjoint Daly fournira sa réponse en anglais et je fournirai la même réponse en français. We will now go to the floor for questions. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions sur le plancher.
Good morning, Brett Ruskin, CBC News. Commissioner, Assistant Commissioner, the Mass Casualty Commission was the biggest, most in-depth, most expensive public inquiry Nova Scotia's ever seen. And they laid out essentially a checklist, a difficult checklist, to be sure, but it's still a checklist of 130 items. Why did the RCMP in this new report outlined today feel it important to recategorize and change and add themes, kind of reorganize those items, whether we call it 33 items or 75 items listed for police? Why did we reorganize that relatively clear and easy to follow checklist from the MCC?
So thanks, Brett, for the question, and I agree with you. It's probably one of the largest, biggest reviews that the RCMP has faced in a long time. The strategic plan that was shared with you was really a roadmap of how we were going to tackle the MCC recommendations. You've seen it, how it's laid out, where there's 10 themes, as you said. there's some of the recommendations that actually touch several recommendations. So for us, it's easier to identify them under 10 themes. And as we progress forward, it's all about transparency and accountability. You've heard me in my opening remarks about this Progress Hub. This Progress Hub will have all the recommendations, not just the 33 that we're leading, but all 130, and the role that the RCMP is playing. Our strategic implementation team is looking at drafting position papers for each of the recommendations. So when the Progress Hub will be up and running, you'll be able to go to the recommendation and really look at all the work that the RCMP has done and why we've got to that reason or the answers or the direction we're taking.
And so just as a follow-up, if we peel away the themes, if we peel away the categories, the reorganization, if we look at the number 130 recommendations, how many of those recommendations has the RCMP completed?
So if you look at the initial diary date for the mass casualty, within the first 6 months, we had to respond to 2 of them. One was training our frontline officers in incident critical response, and the other one is developing leaders, which we've met the diary date. The others, we have 8 and other position papers that we want to release in the coming weeks.
If I,
Is that 10? 2 plus 8?
Yeah.
If I could just add from a Nova Scotia specific lens, so in addition to the 130 from the Mass Casualty Commission, we also are in receipt of additional recommendations and reviews that were done as a result of the death of Heidi Stevenson and the injury to Chad Morrison. The Labor Code, the Federal Labor Code folks, Employment Social Development Canada, have given us directions all along, since April of 2020, they've given us direction. So in addition, we've done an internal hazardous occurrence report. That's a normal thing when we suffer an internal injury or death. So in totality for Nova Scotia, in addition to participating with our team from national headquarters, we have an additional 119 recommendations, of which we've responded to 70. So for Employment Social Development Canada, for instance, on their directions, we've responded to all. We're awaiting final approval from them on 6 of those. So we've made quite a bit of advancement, and a lot of those recommendations intertwine with the mass casualty recommendations. So considerable effort has been done here to advance those additional. So we're waiting for the final report from Employment Social Development Canada. That'll be coming in the coming days. So that'll be their final report.
Question for, it's Mike McDonald from the Canadian Press in Halifax. One of the central recommendations from this report was a rethink of the RCMP's central role in policing in Canada. It's a big recommendation. I'd like to know what progress you've made on that and whether you've been talking to the federal government.
So thanks, Mike, for the question. And the question of the RCMP's role in contract provinces has been raised several times, either in parliamentary committee or articles. The RCMP has 3 core mandates. Indigenous policing, which is a frontline policing, and also specialized policing services, and that serves actually the National Police Services. The question with regard to the RCMP's engagement with contracts is with the contract part, where the contracts that we have with provinces and territories, if you wish, is not one that rests on the RCMP's responsibility. The contracts between the provinces and territories are negotiated through public safety. So any negotiations, if a municipality or province wishes to change police force, those discussions are taken up with the province, and we assist as we go forward. So as of today, Mike, I'm here to tell you that we still have 3 core mandates, and we're driving forward. We're recruiting accordingly for these 3 core mandates.
And again, if I could just add, Commissioner, from a Nova Scotia lens, no doubt you're aware that the province has announced their provincial policing review as a mass casualty recommendation. So that I welcome that review. That review, it appears, although it's early days, will be extremely comprehensive in looking at different models of policing, different funding models of policing, different ways of delivering perhaps specialized services that we currently do for most municipal police departments here in the province. So It also should be perhaps a fundamental change too, is the way police react to social situations that we're seeing, whether it be mental health, whether it be homelessness, and the issues that are facing Nova Scotia today.
Mike, if I can just come back to your question, I just want to add just a couple pieces of information. You've heard in the news where Surrey's looking at going with their own municipal police force. Grand Prairie is the same thing. The role of the RCMP in this situation is when a province or a community, a municipality decides that they want to look at different options, we bring all the information to the municipality or the province so they can make an informed decision. If a decision is to stay with the RCMP, there's discussions with public safety. If there's a decision that's made that they want to entertain going with their own police force, again, public safety are the custodians of the contract. But we do work with public safety, obviously, when we're into our contract.
Hi, I'm Ehren with the Chronicle Herald. You know, you had warnings from neighbours and the Truro police that he had illegal guns, and from the Truro cops put out a warning that he had a handgun and he wanted to kill a cop. You know, there are also reports that your officers had received reports that he had viciously beaten his partner outside the home, and nobody went and knocked on his door, and no warrant was obtained to search his house. What would you do? What would your officers, for these changes that you've made, if you got those calls right now? He's got a handgun by his bed, he wants to kill a cop, and he's not allowed to have any guns at all because he doesn't have a license. He's been beating up his partner, in public in the community. How would your officers respond differently today?
Thank you for that question. The Mass Casualty Commission did take a comprehensive look at all those particular issues. We react to a call for service, and it would be my expectation that, all calls for service are addressed and to the fullest of possibilities, right? It's hard for me to speculate on what the particular officers knew at that particular time. My expectation, when we're dealing with a serious situation of intimate partner violence, for instance, is that we would work, with our partner agencies to, ensure that there's good safety planning around that victim, follow-up required, and all the necessary stops are taking place. So, as in my opening remarks, we're starting those comprehensive collaborative discussions around things such mandatory arrest and charge. So those are very important discussions that the mass casualty surfaced and need to continue, and police then need to react to those. But my expectation of my police officers is that they would investigate and let the evidence take them where they need to be, whether it to be a search warrant or what have you.
Okay, and so my follow-up would be, is one of the issues that was identified in the MCC was that municipalities pay for a set number of officers to be working any day or night, and that night there were, due to various people being off for various human resources reasons, a significant portion of shifts aren't filled. So what percentage of shifts that are paid for in Nova Scotia are going unfilled right now?
Well, it's difficult for me to talk per shift. So we have mechanisms in place to ensure that if we have a vacation or somebody's away on training or somebody is sick, we have mechanisms in place to fill that particular shift. With respect to, Colchester County, for instance, they are responsible for funding frontline police officers. So we have internal mechanisms to collect data and have discussions, say for instance with Colchester, looking at data informing as to why we perhaps would need an increase in resources. We do the best we can with the resources we have. Right now, Nova Scotia, we're in a very good place as far as our recruiting and our retention of employees. Within the RCMP world, we tend to be a destination province. RCMP employees want to come to Nova Scotia, so I generally have very little difficulty filling any sort of vacancy. So right now, in the last year, for instance, we've welcomed 41 new cadets. So our depot training facility has ramped up and is able to deliver, new cadets to our province, so 41. We've also welcomed over 34 experienced officers from other police departments across Canada. So we do have mechanisms in which to constantly assess where we are with human resources, which is a challenge for everybody, every organization, whether it be policing or not. But we do have mechanisms in place to ensure we have the right complement working. The last thing I would say is that we have the ability to surge resources, whether it be from our headquarters, whether it's the other districts. During Portapic, we had multiple areas responding. Our national headquarters respond. So there's various avenues for us to access.
Thank you.
If I can just, I'll give you a little bit of a picture at the national level, because I was asked in previous media interviews the state with regards to vacancies, and it touches a little bit on what Dennis was saying. The current vacancy, the average vacancy across the country right now is about 15%. Mind you, there's some provinces that are a little bit higher than others. Dennis is right. Nova Scotia being a destination of choice, the vacancy pattern is a little low. But if I can share some numbers with you, as of January 2024, we had 14,445 applicants for the RCMP. That was an increase of 49% from the previous years. So the issue that we have, or the concern we have with vacancies, we're in a better position because we're recruiting more people. Our troops now are up to maximum capacity, which is 32 per troop, which we used to have only 24. And the change that we brought into the recruiting process has favored the organization. And Dennis touched a little bit on the experienced police officers. These are police officers from other organizations. I've never seen so many experienced police officers joining our organization. So combine that, the plan is that in a couple of years we'll be in a better position with regards to all positions. And again, if a community or province wishes to increase their allotted positions, well, that's a discussion they must have with the commanding officer. In Nova Scotia, in this instance, would be Dennis, and appropriate funding has got to be sought as well.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Jones. I'm a reporter with the Globe and Mail. And I wanted to ask about, I heard your apology to the families about being unable to keep them safe during the event. And we also heard in the final report about criticisms of the RCMP being unable to admit mistakes. I'm wondering, can you today admit to the family that you made mistakes, admit to the families that you made mistakes?
Yeah, Lindsay, I can start, and then Dennis can chime in. But when I was here last year, I did say that I am terribly sorry for the pain and suffering that the family's gone through and continue to go through. And our members, the role of the police is making sure the community and its citizens is safe. And on that particular day, faced with extenuating circumstances, we weren't able to do that, and I'm sorry for that. I've read the report, and I'll be honest, I struggle with what they went through. I can't even imagine what they went through, losing a loved one in such a way. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what happened.
Again, I'm deeply sorry. I've served this province for half my career. It's unfathomable what happened, and certainly take responsibility for, the not meeting certainly the family's expectations and or the community's expectations. And I'm sorry for that. For me, part of that taking responsibility is doing better, right? And doing better and working and energizing with, the last ounce of time that I have within the RCMP is to making sure that we respond in the future better. We're better resourced, we're better trained. We've made investments in technology, we've made some investments. This must not happen again here in Nova Scotia or across Canada. So for me, it's not only taking responsibility and apologizing, but it's also accountability and ensuring that we're best prepared to respond in the future.
Thanks. And as a follow-up, I wanted to ask about the implementation of the Mass Casualty Commission recommendations. So this report you've put out today says you're working towards the principles of that. But, and for instance, one of the recommendations was to stop depot and sell the land. But, in your report, you're suggesting that the training and delivery of depot should be improved. Why is it working towards the principles and not actually implementing those recommendations, specifically the depot one?
So Lindsay, on the depot question, when you look at the recommendation itself, one, it asks the RCMP to shut down depot and to give the land back. But it also asks that public safety work with provinces and territory to develop a 3-year university degree policing training for all police services across the country by 2032. So that was based on the Finland model in the report that highlights it. Finland's composition of law enforcement is a little different than the RCMP. It's my understanding it's got one law enforcement for the whole country, doing provincial and municipal. And we have 160 different law enforcement agencies across the country. You look at how Quebec train their police officers, how Ontario's is. The tactical aspect is basically the same. I think when you look at the spirit of it, is obviously the RCMP has to get better when it comes to depot. I've been to depot several times, and the training right now for a cadet is 26 weeks. The curriculum is continuously being reviewed. After the 26 weeks training, the cadet it graduates and is assigned to a coach for a period of 6 months. And what I'm seeing, and I shared you with numbers, but what I'm seeing in depot right now is we're seeing the average age of cadet is 29 years old. And that recommendation tied into the importance of having post-secondary degree education. So the average age of our cadets right now are 29 years old. They're coming in with diverse life experience as well as education. 83% of our applicants have some form of post-secondary education. So I think what we really have to look at is depot itself is not just a little RCMP bubble where it's just RCMP ideas. We actually we work closely with certain Canadian universities, a couple American universities. Depot is leading on the international scene with a post-traumatic stress study of cadets, of police officer. So there's a lot of good things being done. Our Management Advisory Board as well has reviewed depot. They've come up with 4 recommendations that we're looking at exploring. So I think, like I said, I can control depot to a certain extent, but if public safety decides to go down the road with regards to one type of training for all law enforcement across Canada, we'll have to adjust. But right now what we're doing is we're learning from these. We're making sure that we incorporate it into the curriculum, and we continue to advance with regards to training. Our curriculum, when it comes to depot, has been used in several parts of the world. So that's why that was one of the recommendations that kind of surprised me when I saw it. But again, the spirit of it's getting better. We want to get better. We want to learn and whatnot.
Bonjour, Catherine Moras pour la chaîne RDI. Donc, Monsieur Duhaime, je vais vous citer. Vous avez terminé en disant que vous voulez dire aux Canadiens qu'ils peuvent faire confiance à la GRC. Ça fait 4 ans depuis la tragédie de Portapic. Le rapport de la Commission des pertes massives a été très dur à l'endroit de la GRC. Comment vous décririez le lien de confiance de la GRC avec les communautés qu'elle dessert?
Merci, Catherine, pour la question. La question de lien de confiance, l'année dernière, quand j'étais ici, j'ai mentionné qu'il faut rebâtir, et de même la Commission a dit qu'il faut rebâtir le lien de confiance avec les gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse ainsi que les Canadiens. Et puis, le lien de confiance se rebâtit en donnant des résultats et en étant transparent. C'est pour ça que le travail que nous faisons au niveau des recommandations, on veut être le plus transparent possible. Et c'est pour ça, d'ailleurs, que je mentionnais le Progress Hub tantôt, qui va dans les 2 langues, on va pouvoir mettre toute l'information, la documentation. Il y a des recommandations pour lesquelles on va chercher de l'expertise externe pour nous aider. Et tout ce qu'on veut faire, c'est qu'on veut mettre les papiers dans le système pour que les gens puissent voir. Puis, faut pas oublier qu'il y a aussi le Progress Monitoring Committee qui existe, qui a été une des recommandations du MCC, qui font leur responsabilité, c'est d'assurer le progrès. Et puis, on a participé 3 fois au comité. Et puis, la présidente du comité est satisfaite du progrès de l'organisation. Je dis pas que tout est beau. On a beaucoup de travail à faire, mais je pense que c'est en livrant les résultats que les Canadiens ainsi que les gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui vont voir que la confiance va être rétablie au niveau de l'organisation.
Je reviens sur ce rapport qui a été déposé l'an dernier. Donc, on sentait l'exaspération du juge MacDonald qui disait... Bon, il y a certains points qui ont été apportés dans des rapports précédents. Je pense par exemple au rapport Bastarache, au rapport qui a été fait après la tuerie de Moncton. Est-ce qu'il y a des leçons que la GRC a enfin apprises après tous ces rapports?
Merci Catherine. Disons que l'organisation est composée de 30 000 personnes et puis pour changer un cap ou la culture de 30 000 personnes, des fois ça peut être un défi comme soi. Je crois sincèrement qu'une des choses qu'on met en place qui n'était pas en place avant pour les autres révisions ou recommandations de différentes revues, c'est la question de Reform, Accountability puis Culture, puis je l'ai lu en français, je m'excuse, j'ai oublié les termes en français. Le secteur comme tel donne la stratégie ou l'organisation qu'on n'avait pas avant. Avant, tout rapport était géré par un responsable de programme et puis je trouve qu'il manquait de continuité. Donc, ce que nous avons fait, on a repriorisé les ressources à l'interne et on a créé la réforme, l'imputabilité et la culture qui, parmi leurs responsabilités, c'est de faire le suivi des recommandations et de pousser les recommandations de l'avant. Donc, c'est non seulement de mettre en place les recommandations, mais c'est pas parce qu'une recommandation est complétée qu'automatiquement qu'elle est poussée de côté, parce qu'il y a d'autres choses qui peuvent arriver dans le monde qui peuvent nous porter à réfléchir d'aller revoir cette recommandation. Mais c'est pas juste au niveau de la perte des commissions de perte massive que le secteur a été créé. Il y a également la commission d'enquête Rouleau qui a eu lieu à Ottawa sur le convoi. Il y a la révision qui a été faite en Saskatchewan également. C'est de ramener toutes les choses à un point central pour que l'organisation ait un bon contrôle puis une bonne vision de qu'est-ce qui se passe pour qu'on puisse assurer, un, qu'on les adresse, deux, qu'on assure un suivi approprié.
Bonjour, Héloïse Rodriguez aussi, Radio-Canada. J'ai une question par rapport à ce que vous avez répondu à mon collègue Brett. Je pense que vous avez dit qu'il y a 10 recommandations qui sont en cours en ce moment, en sachant qu'il y a eu 130 recommandations qui ont été faites. Pourquoi est-ce que vous dites que vous êtes satisfait du progrès s'il y en a seulement 10 qui sont en train d'avancer dans votre cas?
Merci. D'un, je vous rappelle que la commission, c'est écrit dans le rapport que les changements, ça peut prendre du temps. Les changements il y en a certains qui sont plus complexes que d'autres. Je vais vous donner un exemple. D'ailleurs, on avait un échéancier de 6 mois pour rencontrer le premier échéancier qui nous avait été imposé sur 2 des initiatives pour lesquelles on a rencontré. Et puis l'autre, je peux vous donner un exemple au niveau des avertissements, Alert Ready. Par exemple, l'organisation a créé un poste au niveau national de coordination, de formation. La formation au niveau de Alert Ready est maintenant donnée aux cadets à dépôt. Police canadien pour qu'eux aussi peuvent apprendre de ce qu'on a vécu. Et puis, ça a très bien été reçu. Merci.
Sky Bridenblom with Global Halifax. I know that you mentioned the emergency management team has around 18 people now. I'm just wondering how will that staffing increase address any previous gaps in response?
So the Nova Scotia Emergency Response Team, through funding from the provincial government, is now an 18-person full-time team. How that will increase, previous to that, we've had a combination of full-time and also part-time team members. So part-time team members would be working out in a district or what have you. Now they work all together as a full-time team. How that will improve is the sense of not only do we have that full-time team, but we're focusing on then working with other teams, whether it be Halifax Regional Police Team, Cape Breton Regional Police Team. We recently, as recent as 6 weeks ago, hosted a regional workshop for the emergency response teams in the Atlantic. So we had Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, we had Fredericton Police, The goal is to be better interoperable so that we can interchange and replace. Some of these incidents that we experience go on for quite some time. So just this week, some of our folks were assisting New Brunswick RCMP in a very, very serious armed and barricaded where there was shots fired at police. So part of our team went up to assist. Halifax Regional Police provided the redundancy and the backup. So that interoperability, that ability to train together, to know different tactics together, extremely important for public safety. Ideally, we move towards more integration with different teams so that we're fully integrated, fully mobile, so that, and I'll give you a very good example. About 2 weeks ago, right here in Millbrook, we had a shooting incident where public alert was triggered. At the just previous that morning, we had a very serious incident up in Pictou County. So our teams were deployed in multiple areas. So, with the assistance of Truro Police here in Millbrook, we were able to safely arrest not only those in Pictou County, but here in Millbrook as well. So interoperability is better, and then we got to move towards a more integrated model.
Thank you. And another question, when it comes to uniform disposal and also the decommissioning of police cruisers, improvements are being made there. What does that look like?
So if I may, and then I'll ask Dennis to chime in on the provincial side, but on the disposal of uniforms, what we did is looked at the policy and modified the policy, but also looked at the form that a member signs when they retire. We refer to as 1733, and we put actually a section there that the member confirms that he or she no longer has any uniform. Was it 2 weeks ago, actually, my Wednesday roundtable with all the commanding officers from across the country, I asked that to make sure that they adhere to the policy and they have measures in place. So obviously we can't stop everything because you could fabricate things sometimes that is challenged, but we invite the public to call us when you see something. So that would be in the short term. On the longer term, we want to look at is there any legislation under the criminal code that we can enter for someone who has police paraphernalia. So I'll let Dennis go expand on what they're doing here, and I'll come back on the decommissioning of vehicles.
For the uniforms specifically, of course, the province of Nova Scotia passed their Police Identity Management Act. It's called PIMA. So that governs ensures that police departments here in Nova Scotia have rigorous policies and processes in which to destroy their equipment and their uniforms. Since 2021, I know each division here in Nova Scotia has destroyed over 15,000 pounds of uniforms. Each of our units and our detachments in our district have rigorous processes in place to collect and get rid of that equipment. So we are governed here in Nova Scotia under the PIMA legislation, and it gets down to even to the points of shoulder flashes, which traditionally in policing was a gift almost to somebody. So now that is not even allowed under PIMA legislation here in Nova Scotia. So it's that rigorous. We've enforced the PIMA legislation here in Nova Scotia, as has Cape Breton Regional Police. 2 cases that I'm aware of that we've enforced the legislation. And of course, it is illegal to impersonate a police officer. So I just wanted to also make sure the public is aware of that too.
So, Sky, to your second question with regards to decommissioning of vehicles, you might recall that the Minister of Public Safety put a moratorium on all sale of vehicles. So all our vehicles, once they get to the end of life, they go through Crown Asset and they're usually auctioned off. There's a moratorium on that since January, I think, 2021. We've initiated an internal audit from our own audit team following that. And what it revealed that we had good practices in place, but we can be better. And when I say better, especially from a governance perspective, a tracking perspective at the national level. And so that we're working on that. But we also hired, and this is what I referred to earlier, that we go and get subject matter experts. We did hire an external firm, not associated with the RCMP, to review our existing policies. And they felt that the policies we have in place are sufficient. They prevent decals or any piece of equipment to remain on the vehicle. And but they also highlighted one thing. They also highlighted the fact that the vehicles that we use are the same type of vehicles that any one of you can buy at a used car dealership or a brand new car dealership or from an individual. So I have yet to talk with the minister because, again, there's a moratorium on that. So those are some of the discussions I'll have with the minister as we move forward.
Hello, Heidi Petracek with Global National. There's a lot of talk about analysis and review and external reports. I mean, how do you reassure people that the RCMP as such a large organization is not going to fall into analysis paralysis, where you just keep studying and actual actions don't happen or take too long to happen?
Well, Heidi, you're talking to the right individual because I don't like when things linger. I think as an organization, since I've been appointed, I want an organization that's nimble and I want results that are be driven. Perfection sometimes can take a long time, but I think what we should do is make a strong analysis of what it is and then make the decision and move on forward. I honestly think the structure that we have right now is stronger than what we'd had before, in the sense that our reform, accountability, and culture is responsible for reviewing all recommendations, not with just the MCC, but the POIC recommendation, which is the Rouleau inquiry that took place in Convoy in Ottawa, but also other things. If it's a coroner inquest, just to make sure that we have a funnel point and that it's actually coordinated and then shared with the commanding officer across the division. The results will speak by its own. Like I said, in the commission, it was reported that it will take some time to go through everything. I just want to make sure we get things right.
You talk about the hub for letting people know what's going on. What kind of commitment is there to update that regularly? Like, is there a time like every year, every 6 months, every month?
No. So the commitment for us is, as we progress, our commitment is ensuring that the families are made aware first, and then it goes up. We're not waiting for any specific dates. If one is completed, we put it up on the hub. Without any advisory to media or whatnot. It's just we want to get people to go to the hub because
Hi, Nicola Sagan with CBC National News. So a year ago, you promised to make changes, and today you released this report. What is the main thing you want Nova Scotians and Canadians to know that you've changed and accomplished over the past year?
So thanks. Is it Nicholas?
Nicola.
Nicola. Okay. So I'll let Dennis there just chime in on what's going on in Nova Scotia. But the changes, like we've seen the changes with regards to Alert Ready. We've seen the technology that's being used, deployed across the country, that every division has access to this Blue Force tasking. We reviewed our incident command response model. There's two categories. One for the constable, the entry level, just to get a better understanding of what incident command is all about. But the 200 process, it was reviewed again by an independent firm, subject matter experts. There's some improvement to be done there. But all in all, the message is that we've heard this report, we read the report loud and clear, and we are changing as an organization. I just look at the recruiting side of things, where the numbers I shared earlier with you. 49% increase from last year. That's because we modified our approach to what are the criteria when we recruit people. So it's just changing that around. Even in the officer candidate program, where our future leaders of the organization, we've modified the program itself, and we're seeing an increase in people that want to become future leaders of the organization. So we're changing as an organization. Dennis?
And for me, I certainly want Nova Scotians to feel confident in the RCMP, that we're better trained, we're better equipped to respond to critical incidents. The changes that we've talked about here this morning have greatly improved our ability to respond. I don't sit around, though, idle, because public confidence demands that we continually change and we continually evolve. So just yesterday, Tuesday, we had a tabletop exercise in Port Hawkesbury, for instance, for our commanders. Tomorrow it's scheduled for Bible Hill. So that continuous training is the most important thing for me, because we have made changes and we have made improvements, but if we don't continuously evolve with our new commanders coming in, new cadets coming in, we don't continuously practice, then we can get stale. So instilling that learning needs to be and will be a focus of mine, for the next year as we continually push forward.
Thank you. So for a follow-up, you mentioned in the conclusion that there will be challenges ahead. You may not succeed in all your efforts. What do you think will be the main roadblocks that might stop you from making these changes or making progress? This is for both of you.
Is that, do you want to go from provincial level or?
From a provincial level, I don't, the Mass Casualty Commission, I don't really, do I think there's going to be any barriers or challenges? There's always in policing or public safety, working with different partners and different needs, there are always going to be. Do I think they're going to be fundamental and difficult to overcome? No. I think the goal of the Mass Casualty Commission was that systemic review of the whole system. So working better with partners, working, strong, whether it be policing partners, Nova Scotia has changed. I was away for 5 years and I come back and Nova Scotia has changed as far as level of crime, level of violence, social issues that are foremost in all our minds. So I don't specifically have a barrier. I think it will take time. We have to adjust. We have to adjust to the new reality. Funding will always be for organizations that need to support survivors. There'll be funding aspects. So it's not necessarily any one thing that's going to prevent us from moving forward.
So, Nicola, thanks for the question. I think one of the, from my position, obviously I mentioned that there's 33 recommendations that we actually own, right? And I want to make sure that those 33 recommendations that we drive them forward, I'm not going to say as fast as we can, but as I'm going to say as fast as we can in a certain sense, but without missing anything. I think the challenge I'm seeing is not necessarily with the report itself, but the report does touch on it, is what we're seeing in society right now. We have serious concerns with mental health issues, right? There's opioid addictions, there's the violence, intimate violence. It's not just a policing response. We need the right social mechanism to help the people out. And that's at the federal and provincial level, in some instances at the municipal level. So I'm just hoping as we move forward, we do have those right structures and support mechanisms in place for these people.
Thank you.
Hi, Blair Rhodes from CBC. There's a lot of aspirational language in the report today, shall, will. There's been similar language coming out of the aftermath of Mayerthorpe and Moncton and other tragedies involving the RCMP. And in each case, there was a sense that the RCMP was sort of ragging the puck, stalling until people forgot about the incidents and the recommendations, and very little was done. Moncton was one of the examples that was actually referenced by the Mass Casualty Commission of how there were still recommendations on the table that hadn't been touched. What's different this time?
So, Blair, I'm not aware. I was under the impression that all of McNeil reports were action, and I'll ask Dennis because that's in his previous life. But I can understand the skepticism of a certain individual. But I said it earlier. This is the worst mass shooting incident that Canada has ever seen. And I'm sitting here in front of you, committed to say we're going to change. And the fact that we've changed the structure within the organization to allow us to better respond to the reviews and be more accountable. And we've provided the Progress Monitoring Committee the work that we've done so far. As long as I'm here, we're moving forward because I don't want this to have happened for nothing. And if we don't change, we're going to lose the trust of the Canadian public.
Thank you, Commissioner. So just with respect to the McNeil recommendations that came out of the tragic events in New Brunswick in 2014, in my previous role in our national headquarters, I handled the McNeil recommendations. We did submit affidavits to the Mass Casualty Commission outlining that we implemented all 64 of the recommendations of McNeil. The last ones were with respect to Blue Force tracking. That was one of the last ones that we implemented. The McNeil report actually fundamentally changed the RCMP's response to critical incidents, as it should, and learn from the events of Mayerthorpe and or Moncton. Out of McNeil came, the proper carbine funding and distribution, the immediate action response training, where we immediately go to the threat, the initial critical incident response training for our immediate first responders. All that came out. There was aftercare suggestions and whatnot. So McNeil fundamentally changed the RCMP's response to critical incidents. And my expectation is that also the Mass Casualty Commission will then fundamentally change and push us even further.
Both of you have mentioned on many occasions this morning the Alert Ready system. You're extolling the virtues of it. But it came out during the Mass Casualty Commission that the RCMP were actively questioning the viability and effectiveness of the program prior to this incident and dismissing it as a police tool. So again, my question would be, what's changed?
So I'll let Dennis, to be specific of what you're bringing, Blair. I'll just go when the Alert Ready was initially designed, if you wish, many years ago. It was focused really on weather warnings and amber alerts. And you look at it from a law enforcement perspective, when amber alerts were introduced, I think people got adjusted to it, and now it's ingrained in them, and it's a reflex when there's a missing children. They eventually expanded that to 5 different areas, right? Weather, amber, police, public safety emergencies, weather, health, and transport emergencies. When this tragic incident happened in 2020, there wasn't one law enforcement across the country that used the Alert Ready for a public safety emergency situation. So we have learned from that, and I shared earlier is we have developed we have a national coordinator position out of national headquarters that looks after it, that works with the different provinces and whatnot. We've embedded it in our training at our cadet training, and so cadet training has it, and our members are trained on it. So there's and it's been used several times now. I think it's ingrained in the people now to use Alert Ready, and I'll let Dennis elaborate on your specific question with regards to Nova Scotia.
So what's changed here in Nova Scotia is since we got direct access to the system. So in 2021, we've issued 24 alerts to date. We have full-time staff sergeants that work in our 911 center. They're fully empowered to trigger an alert. They work with our strategic communications team to ensure the alert gets out as fast as possible. So we have rigorous policy around that. We are the leaders in Canada with respect to triggering Alert Readies. So what's changed is that Alert Ready has become a critical tool for us to use during critical incidents, for instance.
James Faulkner with Pure Country 99.5. You've talked about the response improvements and obviously the recruitment. I'm wondering what's being done to improve recruitment with 911 operators. You've mentioned about some of the procedures and so on that have been improved in training for the OCC, but certainly the number of 911 operators isn't as high as it was 4 years ago when there was actually operators here in Truro. What could be done to improve that, where they're in a situation with constant overtime calls and teams themselves in general are considered to be short-staffed?
So, James, thanks for the question. I'll have to get back to you specific training. Our OCC operators do go through a specific training for the task at hand. And when they're involved in instances as such, there are support mechanisms that are there to support them. But I would have to get back to you what additional training has been offered since the report was tabled. So I'm more than happy to circle back with you.
But as far as just recruitment for 911 operators to ensure that these teams are, not necessarily fully staffed, but better staffed than they have been the last few years.
Well, the recruitment, and I'm for one who we have to be aggressive in our recruiting. I understand that at one point it was a question of pay parity with other OCC operators in part of the country. I don't have the exact number when it comes to the number of vacancies across the country, but I'd be happy to circle back with you. And Dennis, I'm not quite sure if you can add anything from a Nova Scotia perspective.
I can talk specifically about Nova Scotians. Our 911 center is a busy hub of activity. We actually just welcomed in, or will be welcoming in, as I talked about, experienced police officers. We're actually welcoming in 4 additional experienced 911 operators. So they go through rigorous training. Again, part of my past life was managing the policy center for the Operational Communication Center, so they go through a rigorous training process. One thing we have got better and probably still need to improve is on the wellness supports and the recognition of what they hear and what the trauma that they go through. In our redesigned, what's new in Nova Scotia as well, our redesigned 911 center opened in 2021. You talk about a center that is better prepared even to handle the chaos of a mass casualty event as far as layout of the area. So we actually have down rooms now, which I would never have seen in my service 30 years ago, where we actually have down rooms for the operators to go as they've heard a very difficult call. They can now go to a down room, and so there's employee supports that we probably have to get better as we learn more about trauma. But the training that they go through is certainly rigorous, and each one of our police officers, they are their lifeline. So very close relationships between the 911 operators and the police officers out in the field.
Hi, Jonathan McGinnis, CTV News. Have any of the recommendations that you've spoken about today proven to be more difficult to implement, and if so, can you tell me why?
So, Jonathan, thanks for the question. The recommendations that we put in place were the ones that we deemed priority. Obviously, I mentioned the alert system. I also mentioned the ICR, Incident Command Response, which is an online course given to frontline people at the constable level and the supervisor level. That was the 200 was reviewed, and we, as an organization, have to look at the training, how it's delivered, and modify it. So the ones that we've had so far, for instance, when you look at the Alert Ready that was rolled out, to me that was an important one, so we get the message out there quickly. We finalized it. I think the last division was Nunavut to finalize it, I think it was a month ago. So this goes on to what I said earlier. Some will go faster than others because we don't control everything. But I'm happy to say that there's one initiative that we deemed that was pretty critical in informing the general public that's now throughout the country. The mechanisms that it's being activated differs. Dennis has direct access to the system and his team. Other parts of Canada is the same, and there's other parts where there's indirect access to the system.
Assistant Commander, you mentioned about the 41 new cadets who've come to Nova Scotia, the 34 others who have transferred in. Obviously, some would have left through either retirement or transfers. What is the net gain to Nova Scotia?
And you're correct. We have had, normal attrition. We've had, since April of 2020, we've had impacted employees that have exited the organization, hopefully well supported and with dignity. They've exited the organization. The net gain is that right now I would consider Nova Scotia being at a stable point. Our vacancy rate is very low. It's in around the 5% area of vacancy, where, to me, there's always going to be a point of time that there's vacancies where somebody has transferred out, somebody's been promoted, somebody, where we always concentrate our efforts is not so much on filling that hard vacancy, because, as I mentioned, we're in a luxury spot. People want to come to Nova Scotia, so there's generally a list wanting to come. Where we concentrate our efforts is more on our off-duty sick, no different than any organization. We do have very strong supports in place for our employees and redundancy as well. So for instance, you know, if we are short a particular person either through the use of overtime, you know, for me, overtime is never a staffing model because it ends up burning out our employees. So we look at other things. We can bring in reservists who are fully trained RCMP officers who have retired, who want to come back, so we employ those. This past summer, we actually deployed people out of our headquarters in order to give our frontline respite time to enjoy their summer holidays as well. So we do monitor the off-duty sick very closely and ensure that we have things in place to address vacancies.
I believe all reporters in the room have had a chance to ask one question and one follow-up. We'll now take questions from those joining us by phone for reporters as well. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des personnes et journalistes, plutôt des journalistes qui nous rejoignent par téléphone. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Faites étoile 1 pour toute question. The first question, la première question, is from Kat Tooney from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hello there. Thank you for taking a question from Ottawa. We're hearing a lot this morning about how the RCMP is committed to change. The Canadians have heard that from the RCMP before, you know, the Backtrash report, the McNeil report, the Lowe report. Why would Canadians trust you today?
Thanks, Catherine, for the question. I said earlier that judge us by the results that we're going to have as we move forward with addressing the recommendation. That's a good way of believing in us and what we want to do. The comments from the Progress Monitoring Committee reflects the progress that the RCMP has been doing. And when I'm saying I'm changing, the organization is in change because I mentioned earlier about the recruiting process, how we've changed it. We're seeing more diversity from our cadets. We also changed our officer candidate program for future leaders. We changed that, and you're seeing more and more people being interested. So there is a change in the organization, getting the right leaders in the right position. And as we bring more diversity in the organization, that culture that it's often pointed out at us will change, but there's a lot of work being done across the country. And like I said, results will speak by themselves.
You know, and I know the call for an independent review of the RCMP model isn't one of the 33 recommendations that you have direct control over. Obviously, we're asking Ottawa for their update as well. But you must have an opinion, and I'm wondering, you know, do you think that exercise, that external independent public review would improve the RCMP?
So thanks again for the follow-up question. That would be up to public safety, as I mentioned earlier, to proceed with an external review. I am here representing 30,000 proud employees across the force who come to work every day trying to make a difference and whatnot. So as I said, 3 core mandates: federal policing, contract Indigenous policing, and specialized policing services. And our recruitment model is based on those 3 key priorities.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Sarah Plowman from CTV National News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. A lot of what you're saying is looking forward, but having spoken with families in the past, it was important for you to acknowledge what they called mistakes that were made and admit these mistakes. And I know you were asked about this earlier. But what I heard in your answer earlier was that you still weren't willing to admit mistakes, that you were repeating lines that you said a year ago where you were apologizing for what families experienced, but not admitting mistakes. Am I hearing you correctly, or are you admitting mistakes today?
Well, Shara, thanks for the question. And yeah, I did say that we did not live up to the expectation. We did not live up to la raison d'être of policing communities. And the report itself is clear. We've made mistakes. And Dennis touched on it earlier, and I'm sorry for the mistakes that were made. It was not for lack of our members being going to the scene, addressing the scene the best they could with the tools and equipment, the training they have. The incident itself was one that's never been seen, and I acknowledge that mistakes have been made, and it reflected in the report.
And to me, that answer is very different than what I heard from you last year in my interpretation. So what has changed for you between now and then? Obviously, you've read the report, but if you could expand on that.
Yeah, a couple of things that have changed, Shara, and last year I was not privy to the whole report, and I took the time to go and visit the various crime scenes, really to have a better appreciation so that when I do read the report, I clearly understand what our members went through, but most importantly, what the families of the victims went through. So what has changed is, one is obviously there's a better understanding of the complexity of the environment that we operated in, the need to change when it comes to equipment, the need to change when it comes to critical incident command, the need to change with regards to technology, which we're seeing some of that, and most importantly, sharing our lessons learned with law enforcement agencies across Canada so no one faces a potential situation like we went through.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Justin Ling from Freelance. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hey, good morning. Just to pick up on those last few questions, I'm wondering, I'm not asking to recap the report here, but I'm wondering if you can kind of detail in your own words what those mistakes were. You know, what actually led to you not delivering the quality of service that Canadians expect from you? Because, you know, in the language you've used, it's been quite general, but in the MCC report, it was very specific, that admitting specific mistakes, owning up to them, is the only way you can actually kind of connect these solutions and strategies to sort of real change. So can you kind of give me, as short as possible, just an explanation for why you think the RCMP response didn't meet the mark?
Okay, Justin, I'll ask Dennis to respond to your question.
So when I, just from my either prior experience, you know, talking to employees or else reading the mass casualty report, you know, recognize our employees, all our employees, you know, responded to the best that they could that night based on the training, the equipment, the awareness that they had. I feel that's really important for us to start off with. Having said that, when you respond to a mass casualty event, it is chaotic. You don't know what's going on. You really don't have that overall situation awareness. Decisions were made with the best information at the best time. In hindsight, as we look back, we can see that, not having access to the public alerting system, I think would have been a tremendous advantage during the response. Things like technology, not having the technology, not having access to the mapping. I know a lot has been made about not knowing where the Blueberry Field Road was. So, there were mistakes made. Would I expect mistakes to be made at every response? Absolutely. That's why we do comprehensive after-action reports after every, and we look to improve. Those are just some of the ones that come to my immediate mind as far as were areas identified that we can improve on. Absolutely, and that's the concentration, and my priority as the commanding officer for Nova Scotia is to do those things better.
Okay, this is a follow-up, and Commissioner, I'm hoping you can speak to this directly. Often when I hear you explain the things that went wrong, they're sort of indirect and they're sort of passive. We didn't have access to this. We didn't have access to this technology or this reporting system. But the MCC is very clear that some of the failures were resourcing, equipment, training, decision-making, leadership. I'm wondering if you can kind of take responsibility for that in really specific terms. And what's more, the recommendations say that taking responsibility ought to be a prerequisite for advancement in the force. We are 4 years on from this event, and this is really the first time I think many of us are hearing you say that the RCMP is responsible for these mistakes. You were promoted to commissioner by the Prime Minister just a few months ago without having taken that responsibility, without having made that direct apology. Is this itself indicative of the RCMP still not changing?
So thanks, Justin. And it wasn't a few months ago; it was about a year ago from today. I was promoted to the position. I hear you loud and clear. The areas that require improvement are clearly highlighted in the Mass Casualty Commission, and we are taking responsibility. Actually, we just renewed our core values, and one of the core values is actually taking responsibility. So I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your question. Again, the mass casualty highlights the areas that require improvement. Dennis and I and other COs, commanding officers across the country are committed to make sure that everything is reviewed and the right measures are put in step. Thank you.
With our last reporter finishing question on the phone there, this concludes our media availability today. Thank you for attending. Ceci conclut le point de presse aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup de votre présence.
Thank you, everyone.
So yeah, gang, we're going to wrap it up right there. This has been 3 hours of pretty cool footage, I think. We're trying really hard at Question Period Canada, to show you the stuff that matters. That last bit with the RCMP, that's a big investigation in my province, so a little bit personal. But the other stuff, guys, those are just interesting politicians, and we need an election so badly. That's all Canadians want, is a chance to change the course of action that we're taking. This Trudeau, guys, I just had a great conversation with a friend, and actually feeling pretty cynical about how tough the times are and what are we going to do to get out of them, because Trudeau probably has a couple of dirty tricks left up his sleeve. What are we going to do? Who knows? Anyways, we'll wrap it up. I'm Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We have a blast. It's been a very fun Friday afternoon. Freaky Friday, right? Of Wicked Easter weekend. So we'll see what happens next. We'll be back maybe tomorrow. We've got some other things planned. Back on Monday, same time, same place. That's it. We're going to wrap up, guys. Thank you all for hanging out this afternoon, getting more educated on Canadian politics. Guys, we've only got room to improve, right? So we'll try to stick with that. I'm Ehren, Question Period Canada. Thank you so much for watching. Have something healthy to eat. Try to stay warm. Spring is in the air. It's 14 degrees in Nova Scotia. Pretty nice. We're out, guys. We'll catch you next video. Thank you.